Renard stood before a gate that wasn't there. Two stone pillars jutted out of the ground like rotten teeth. Between them hung a rusty chain with a sign. The letters were almost worn away, but he knew what it said. Grauwald Estate, the ancestral estate of the Asher family. He knew because he had seen that sign before, in another life. Back then he had stood here too. Back then he had turned around and walked away. He decided the ruins weren't worth his time. He sold the rights to the land to his creditors for a third of its value and left for the capital. For 14 years he built his career at court. For 14 years he traded in connections and other people's secrets. He became an advisor to the treasury. He wore silk and ate from silver. And then the man he trusted most of all plunged a knife between his third and fourth ribs right there in his office overlooking the royal garden. The last thing he saw in that life was someone else's fingers on his seal. But that was then. Now he is 19. Now he stands before the same gates. Now in his pocket lies a scroll bearing his seal of office, stating that he, Renard Asher, is the sole heir to the Grauwald estate and assumes all the debts of the late Lord Danver Asher to the crown, amounting to 11,000 silver marks. The wind blew in his face. It smelled of wet stone and something sour. He stepped over the chain. The road beyond the gate had once been paved. Now the stones jutted out of the mud, every other one. Grass, tough and brown, was pushing through between them. A wall stretched out to his left, or rather, what remained of it. The lower rows of masonry were still standing, but the upper ones had collapsed inward. In 3 places, the wall was completely gone. Through the gaps, he could see a field overgrown with thistles. Renard walked along the road, counting. It was a habit from his past life, calculating the value of everything he saw. 14 years at the treasury had taught him to appraise every stone, every beam, every patch of land. The wall would require at least 200 marks to restore. The road, another 50. The gate, 40. And that was just the entrance. He hadn't reached the castle when it happened. Something flashed in the corner of his eye. Not light, not a shadow. It was more as if the air before his eyes had grown denser for a moment, and then it was gone. Renard stopped. He turned his head to the left. Nothing. He turned to the right. Nothing. He stood alone in the middle of the rutted road. The wind rustled the grass between the stones. Somewhere in the distance, a crow cawed. He decided it had been his imagination and continued on. The castle came into view around a bend in the road. The word castle was too grand a term for it. It was a tower. Just one. Square. 4 stories if you counted the partially collapsed top floor. A lower structure clung to the tower. It had once been a reception hall. The roof had sagged in the middle. The walls were intact, but the windows gaped empty. No glass, no shutters. A courtyard lay in front of the tower. The well in the center of the courtyard was filled with stones. The stable on the right stood roofless. The smithy on the left looked better than the other buildings. Its walls were thick, and the forge was still in place. But the chimney was cracked from top to bottom, and the anvil lay on its side. Renard stood in the middle of the courtyard and looked at it all. In a past life, he had seen this scene and felt revulsion. A pile of stones in the middle of a wasteland. A burden. An anchor that would drag him to the bottom. Back then, he was a boy who dreamed of the capital. Now he was a man who knew how dreams of the capital ended. He walked over to the well. The stones used to block it off weren't building stones. Someone had thrown debris from a wall into it. On purpose. Renard bent down and picked up the first stone. It was heavy. Sharp edges dug into his palms. He carried it over to the wall and set it down on the ground. He went back. He picked up the second one. The third. By the 5th stone, his hands began to tremble. On the 7th, he scraped the skin off his right palm. He didn't stop. He remembered something from his past life. Not a fact, but a feeling. A feeling that he had missed something important here. Something that couldn't be seen if he simply turned around and walked away. He pulled out the 12th stone when it happened again. The air before his eyes grew thick. But this time, not just for a moment. Lines appeared in the air like letters appearing on paper held up to a flame. Slowly. One by one. He read them and his hands froze. Grauwald Estate. Condition. Critical. Owner. Renard Asher. Ownership level. 0. Well. Condition. Clogged. Upon restoration, the owner receives a buff. Stamina +2. Renard reread the lines 3 times. Then he lowered the stone he was holding. Then he sat down right on the ground. In his past life, he had spent 14 years at court. He had seen artifacts. He had seen magical contracts. He had seen how the royal ranking system worked. He knew that enhancing the body cost money beyond the wildest dreams of a minor provincial lord. One level of stamina in the capital cost 400 marks. 2 levels for clearing out a well. 800 marks for work he'd done with his bare hands. He looked at his scraped palms. He looked at the lines in the air. He looked at the pile of remaining stones. He stood up. He grabbed the next stone. He worked until dark. His 19-year-old body wouldn't obey him as it should. His muscles were weak. His breath would catch every 10 stones. His palms had turned into one continuous wound, but he didn't stop. In his past life, he had realized one thing that most people never understand. Nothing is free. If something seems free, it means you're paying with something you don't yet know about. But here the price was immediately apparent. Labor, stone, time, hands. A fair deal. He pulled the last stone out of the well just as the sky turned dark blue. The first stars were already beginning to appear. He stood over the black circle of the well's mouth, breathing heavily. Lines flickered in the air. Well, status restored. Stamina +2. Applied. It hit him like a bucket of cold water. It didn't hurt. It wasn't pleasant. It just suddenly became easier. His breathing evened out. The trembling in his hands subsided. He was still exhausted, but somewhere inside him a reserve had appeared that hadn't been there before. It was as if the strength he'd expended that day had been restored to him, and more had been added. Renard sat down on the edge of the well. The water below glinted with the reflection of a star. He stretched his arms out in front of him. The blood on his palms had already dried. He thought. In his past life, nobles bought potions from the royal alchemists. A simple vial of stamina elixir cost 400 marks and provided a 1-level boost. A vial of strength elixir costs 600. Intelligence, 1,200. Defense, 1,500. And every elixir had its limit. The body got used to it. After the 3rd or 4th dose, the effect dropped to 0. That's why the kingdom's strongest nobles had stats in the 10 to 12 range. He looked at the smithy, then at the stable, then at the wall, then at the tower, then at the dark outlines of the buildings beyond the tower, which he hadn't even seen up close yet. How many buildings were on the estate? How many of them were destroyed? How many could be restored? He began counting again. And the longer he counted, the slower and deeper his breathing became. The well provided 2 levels of stamina. Logically, the smithy should provide strength. The library, if there even was one, would provide intellect. The wall, defense. And what about the buildings he couldn't even guess at? The barracks, a chapel, a mill, a bridge. Every building is a boost. Every restored stone is a step forward. The nobles in the capital spend thousands of marks to raise a stat by a single point, and he gained 2 levels in a single day of manual labor. But alongside that thought, another lingered in his mind. 11,000 marks in debt to the crown. The repayment deadline was 4 months. If he didn't pay, the crown would take the land. And along with the land, it would take the system as well. Renard stood up from the edge of the well. His legs were buzzing. His back ached. His palms were burning. But inside, something else was burning. In that life, he had chosen the capital and been stabbed in the back. In this life, a pile of stones stood before him. And each stone was worth more than he had thought. He entered the tower. Inside, it was dark and smelled musty. A staircase led upward. The steps were made of stone. 3 of them were cracked but still held. The second floor turned out to be a room. Empty. A stone floor. A narrow window. In the corner lay a mattress stuffed with something hard. A table stood nearby. On the table lay a thick book in a leather binding. Renard approached the table. The book was covered with a layer of dust a finger's width thick. He wiped the dust away with his sleeve. The cover bore an embossed coat of arms. A wolf against a backdrop of stone masonry. The Astor's coat of arms. He opened the book. The first page, a detailed map of the estate. He leaned in closer. In the moonlight streaming through the window, he made out the outlines. The castle stood in the center. Surrounding the castle was a courtyard with 6 buildings. Beyond the courtyard was an inner wall. Beyond the wall was a village. Not just one, 3 villages. One to the north of the castle, one to the east, one to the south. Beyond the villages was an outer wall. Beyond the outer wall were fields. Beyond the fields was a forest. Next to each building on the map was a name and a handwritten note. Well, working. This had been crossed out and something else written over it in a different hand. Clogged. The hammer and anvil smithy is still standing. The chimney needs repair. Stable. No roof. Library. The internal staircase has collapsed. Access to the upper levels is impossible. Barracks. Walls intact, empty inside. Chapel. Not inspected. Granary. Burned down. Bridge over Gray Creek. 3 of the 5 supports are destroyed. Impassable. Renard turned the page. On the second page was a list. Population of the Grauwald estate. The northern village of Stenhall. Population, 11 people. The eastern village of Brickmore. Population, 6 people. The southern village of Torfeld. Population, 0. Abandoned. Total, 17 people. Renard closed the book. 17 people. 3 half-dead villages. Ruins instead of an estate. And 11,000 marks in debt. In his past life, he would have looked at these numbers and laughed. What's the point of wasting energy on a corpse? But today he had cleared out the well and his body felt stronger than it had that morning. Today he learned that every stone in these walls was not a burden but the price for a strength that no amount of money in the capital could buy. He lay down on the mattress. It was hard. It smelled of old straw. The ceiling above him was made of stone. A star was visible through a crack between the slabs. He closed his eyes. Tomorrow, the forge. If a well had given him endurance, then the forge should give him strength. He needed strength to work faster. He needed to work faster because he had 4 months, 120 days, 11,000 marks, and not a single ally. He fell asleep with a taste of blood on his lips from his cracked palms. He couldn't dream of anything. In his past life, he had often dreamed of a study overlooking the royal garden and someone else's fingers on his seal. It was quiet here. Only the wind in the cracks and the distant cry of an owl. Renard woke up before dawn. His body ached. Every muscle reminded him of yesterday's rocks. But the pain felt different than it should have. Lighter. His 2 levels of stamina were working even in his sleep. He got up from the mattress, went down the stairs, and stepped out into the courtyard. The sky in the east was gray with a pink streak on the horizon. The well had been cleared out. He walked over and peered down. The water level had risen overnight. It was clear. He cupped his hands and washed his face. Cold. It stung his palms. The scraped skin burned from the water. He straightened up and looked at the smithy. The walls were thick. The forge was dark. The chimney was cracked. The anvil lay on its side. Yesterday, the lines had appeared in the air only when he began working. Not before. Not when he was looking at the well. Not when he was thinking about the repairs. But when he lifted the first stone. The system reacts to action. He walked over to the smithy. The door was hanging by a single hinge. He stepped inside. It smelled of old iron and ash. The blast furnace stood against the far wall. A stone basin held the remains of coal. The bellows hung on a hook. The leather was cracked but hadn't torn. The pipe ran upward, and a crack stretched from the middle all the way to the top. Through it, he could see a patch of gray sky. The anvil lay 2 paces away from its pedestal. Heavy. About 300 pounds, he estimated. In his past life, he knew the weight of metal. The treasury kept track of everything. Renard walked around the anvil. He crouched down. He tried to move it. It didn't budge. Even with 2 levels of stamina, he couldn't lift 300 pounds. He needed help. 17 people in 3 villages. No, in 2. The southern village was abandoned. 11 in Stenhall. 6 in Brickmore. He stepped out of the smithy and looked north. The road led away from the castle through a breach in the wall and disappeared into the hills. According to the map, it was about an hour's walk to Stenhall. He set off. The road was worse than the one leading up to the castle. The cobblestones ended after 200 paces. Beyond that was a trail. Narrow, muddy. Bushes grew on both sides. Half an hour later, he saw the first signs of a settlement. A fence. Crooked. Behind the fence was a vegetable garden. Small. Cabbage and something that looked like turnips. Then another fence. And yet another. Stenhall turned out to be a dozen houses standing in a semicircle around a dry pond. 4 houses looked inhabited. Smoke was rising from 2 chimneys. The rest stood with boarded-up windows or without roofs. Renard entered the village. No one was there. Then the door of the nearest house opened. An old man stood in the doorway. Thin. His face was dark from the sun. His hands were large and gnarled. He looked at Renard the way people look at a stranger who's wandered into the wrong place. Renard stopped 5 paces away from him. He knew what to say. 14 years at court had taught him one thing. People don't believe words. People believe what you do with your hands. He raised his palms and showed them to the old man. Scraped skin. Blood crusts. Dirt caked into the wounds. He said he cleaned out the well at the castle. all by himself, yesterday. Now he needed help with the smithy. The old man stared at his palms for a long time. Then he looked him in the eyes. Then he said that the former lord hadn't set foot in the village even once in 9 years. Renard replied that the former lord was dead. The old man nodded. He said his name was Morin and that he was the elder of Stenhall. Then he asked why the new lord needed a smithy if he didn't have a blacksmith. Renard asked where the blacksmith had gone. Morin explained that the blacksmith had left 7 years ago along with half the village. He'd gone south to the cities. There they pay with money, not empty promises. Renard asked who among those left behind could work. Morin said 4 of them could, himself, his son, Talvin, a woman named Brig, who used to be a carpenter, and a young lad named Suno, who is strong but dim-witted. The other 7 are old women, children, and 1 cripple. Renard said he needed all 4 of them, tomorrow, at dawn, at the castle. Morin looked at him with a long, heavy gaze. Then he asked what they would get in return. Renard could have lied. In his past life, he lied every day. Promises, titles, positions, words that mean nothing. He told the truth. He had no money. Right now, he didn't have a single mark. He could offer only one thing: clean water from the well he had cleared out yesterday. The old man looked at him. Renard could see his face working. His lips tightened, his eyes narrowed. Then something twitched. Not in his face, in his shoulders. Morin asked if the well really worked. Renard nodded. Morin said that Stenhall carried water from a stream half an hour's walk away, every day. 2 buckets per person. An hour there and back. If the well works, he'll come. Renard turned around and headed back. Halfway there, he turned east, toward Brickmore. The eastern village turned out to be even smaller. 4 houses, 2 inhabited, 6 people. An old woman, 2 boys about 12 years old, a woman holding a child, and a man in his 30s, short, broad-shouldered, with hands that knew hard work. His name was Cord. He was the only able-bodied man in Brickmore. Cord wouldn't hear a word about the well. He said he didn't care who the new lord was. Lords come and go, but hunger remains. He asked if Renard had any food. Renard said no. Cord shrugged and closed the door. Renard stood in front of the closed door and wasn't angry. In his past life, he would have been offended. The door had been slammed in the Lord's face. But in his past life, he learned something about doors. At least those who slam doors are honest. Those who keep the door open don't always do so out of hospitality. He returned to the castle in the afternoon. He ate the last piece of bread from his travel bag. The bread was hard. 5 days on the road. He washed it down with water from the well. The water was good. Then he went over to the smithy and began doing what he could do on his own. A pipe. The crack ran from the bottom to the top. He couldn't repair the pipe. He had no mortar, no tools, no masonry skills. But he could gather some clay. He remembered where he'd seen clay soil, by the well, when he'd been hauling stones. He dug up the clay with his hands and kneaded it with his feet, adding water from the well. The result was a runny mush. Not mortar, not even plaster, but better than nothing. He patched the lower part of the crack. The clay went on unevenly. It didn't hold well. Half of it slid right off. He applied it again and again. By evening, the lower third of the crack was sealed. Crooked, messy, but sealed. No lines appeared in the air. The system didn't count it. He understood. A partial repair doesn't count. He had to see it through to the end. He couldn't budge the anvil either, not even with wet clay underneath it to act as a lubricant. 300 pounds is 300 pounds. He sat down on the floor of the smithy. He leaned his back against the wall. He closed his eyes. In his past life, he'd solved problems with money. No blacksmith? Hire one. No mortar? Buy some. No workers? Pay them. There was no money here, but the problem had to be solved. He opened his eyes. He looked at the bellows. The leather was cracked but hadn't torn. If he greased them, they'd work. He looked at the bellows. The stone was intact. There was no coal, but there were trees in the forest beyond the wall. He looked at the tools. 3 hammers hung on the wall, 2 small ones and 1 large one. Pliers. A chisel. Everything was rusty but intact. The smithy was dead, but it wasn't destroyed. That's a huge difference. What's dead can be brought back to life. What's been destroyed has to be rebuilt. He stood up. He went out into the courtyard. The sun was setting. His second day in Grawwald. 1 restored well. 1 unfinished smithy. 4 people who might come tomorrow. 1 who definitely won't come. 4 months. 11,000 marks. He climbed up to the tower, opened the book, reread the list of buildings. A well, a smithy, a stable, a library, barracks, a chapel, a granary, a bridge. And that's just the castle and its immediate surroundings. But what about the villages? Every village has its own buildings. Houses, barns, wells, fences. If the system grants a boost for every structure restored, he stopped counting when he reached 30. 30 potential boosts, at a minimum. If each one grants at least one level, not a single noble in the kingdom had 30 levels in any single attribute. The strongest man Renard had known in his past life was General Corvain. 12 levels of strength, 10 levels of stamina. He was considered a demigod. Renard closed the book. He lay down on the mattress. The ceiling. A crack. A star in the crack. The same star as yesterday. He didn't know its name. In his past life, he didn't look at the stars. He looked at numbers. Numbers were his stars. And right now, the numbers were telling him two things. First, this estate is worth more than the entire capital, if you know its secret. Second, he doesn't have a single day to think it over. He fell asleep, dreamless, once again. Morin arrived at dawn. He wasn't alone. Talvin, his son, turned out to be a man of about 25. He was quiet and sinewy, with long arms and a wary gaze. Behind him walked Brig, a woman in her 40s with short gray hair and a stocky build. She carried an axe over her shoulder, not a battle axe, a carpenter's axe. Its broad blade was dark with caked-on resin. Bringing up the rear was Suno, a boy of about 17, tall, broad-shouldered. His head was small for such shoulders. His eyes darted around the castle courtyard with dull curiosity. Morin said that was everyone. 4 of them. Renard nodded. He led them to the well. He scooped up some water with a bucket he found in the tower. He handed it to Morin. Morin drank for a long time. He handed the bucket to his son. Talvin drank in silence. Brig drank. Suno drank 2 buckets and asked for a third. Morin wiped his mouth with his sleeve. He said the water was good, better than from the stream, colder and cleaner. Then he looked at Renard and asked what to do. Renard pointed to the forge. First, the anvil. Morin, Talvin, and Suno had to lift it onto the pedestal. 300 pounds divided by 3 is 100 pounds per person. It was hard, but possible. Second, the pipe. Brig was supposed to inspect the crack and tell them what was needed for the repair. Third, he himself would go into the forest for charcoal. A horn without charcoal is just a hole in a rock. The work began. Renard headed toward the forest beyond the wall. The forest began a quarter-hour's walk away. It was an old forest. The trees were tall. There was a lot of deadwood. He didn't cut down any trees. For charcoal, he needed wood that had already been charred, dry branches, and broken trunks. He gathered them and hauled them on his back, bundle after bundle. His back ached. His hands were on fire. Stamina +2 helped, but it didn't work miracles. He didn't become Superman. He became a man who could work just a little longer than he had yesterday. On his third trip to the forest, he heard a scream from the smithy. Suno. Renard dropped the bundle and ran. In the smithy, Suno was sitting on the floor, clutching his leg. The anvil lay on its side. Next to it lay what Suno had dropped. Talvin stood over him, his face as white as chalk. Morin was cursing quietly but furiously. Renard knelt down beside Suno. His leg. His right foot. He carefully pulled off the boot. The toes were swollen, but the bones felt intact to the touch. A bruise, not a fracture. Suno whimpered. Renard told him to sit still and not move. Then he turned to Morin and Talvin. That wasn't the right way to lift the anvil, he explained. In his past life, the treasury had overseen military supplies. He'd seen soldiers set up siege engines. The principle was the same. Don't lift it. Roll it. A lever. A prop. Another lever. Another prop. Morin listened. His expression changed. Not quickly. Not noticeable to someone who couldn't read faces. But Renard had spent 14 years at court. He could. The old man stopped looking at him like a boy. The 3 of them worked together. Renard, Morin, Talvin. 2 logs from the woods became levers. Stones from the wall became supports. Slowly, 1 finger at a time. The anvil rose, rolled, rose. By noon, it stood on its pedestal. Talvin walked around it and tapped it with a hammer. The sound was clear. The metal was good. By this point, Brig had finished inspecting the pipe. She approached Renard and said that the clay wouldn't hold. The crack was too wide. They needed mortar, lime, and sand. There was sand in the stream. Lime could be burned from stone, but that required a kiln, which they didn't have. Renner asked how long the repair would take if they found lime. Brigg thought for a moment and replied, 2 days, maybe 3. Renner nodded. He remembered something from his father's book, the chapel. He hadn't checked it yet. Chapels are built from white stone. White stone is limestone. Lime is made by burning limestone. He told Brigg that the chapel was behind the tower's east wing and that she needed to check what kind of stone it was made of. Brigg raised an eyebrow. She asked how the young lord knew about limestone. Renner replied that he'd read about it in a book. That was a lie. He knew about limestone because, in his past life, he had overseen the construction of a new wing of the palace for the chancellor. But he couldn't mention that. A 19-year-old heir to a ruined house couldn't possibly know anything about palace construction. Brigg went off to check the chapel. Renner returned to the firewood. Suno was limping but refused to leave. He sat by the wall, splitting kindling with one hand. Slowly. Crookedly. But he kept splitting. By evening, the horn was loaded. Dry branches at the bottom, kindling on top. Renner took a flint from his bag. He struck a spark. The tinder caught fire. The flames took hold. He pumped the bellows himself. The leather creaked. Air flowed in. The coals began to glow. Smoke billowed out of a crack in the chimney. Half the draft was going the wrong way. The forge was operating at a third of its capacity, maybe a quarter, but it was working. Brigg returned. She said the chapel was built of limestone. The lower rows. The upper ones were made of ordinary stone, but the lower rows would be enough. The problem was that he'd have to partially dismantle the chapel to extract the limestone. Rennert thought, a chapel is a structure. A structure is a potential reinforcement. If he dismantled the chapel for the sake of the forge, he'd lose one reinforcement for the sake of another. Or maybe not. If he later rebuilt the chapel using a different material. But that's for later. Right now he needs a smithy. Strength. Physical strength. Without it, he won't be able to repair things faster. Without faster repairs, he won't meet the deadline for his debt. He made his decision. Dismantle the bottom row of the chapel. Burn lime in the kiln. Make mortar. Repair the pipe. He told this to Brigg. She nodded. No questions. No surprise, she was the kind of person who respected a decision made quickly. Morin stood nearby and listened. When Rennart finished, the old man said one thing. He said that Lord Danver hadn't made a single decision in 9 years. He sent letters, demanded taxes, promised to send a steward. The steward never came. The money never arrived. The villages were emptying out. People were leaving. Those who stayed did so because they had nowhere else to go. Rennart was silent. Morin continued. He said that the young lord had done more in 2 days than the old one had in 9 years. But words are one thing. A well is a well. We'll see what happens when winter comes. Rennart didn't argue. Morin was right. A well is a well. Winter is winter. Between them lay 4 months and 11,000 marks. The 4 workers left at sunset. Rennart let each of them draw water. Morin carried 2 buckets. Talvin carried 2. Brigg was just one man and an axe. Suno hobbled along, carrying nothing. Rennart watched as they walked away along the trail to the north. 4 dark figures against the backdrop of the sunset sky. They were his subjects, all of them. 4 out of 17. The 4 who had come for water, not for their lord. He returned to the smithy. The forge was still smoldering. He stood before the anvil and looked at it. 300 pounds of metal on a stone pedestal. Dead. Without a blacksmith, an anvil is just iron. Without mortar, a pipe is just a crack. Without money, a lord is just a title. But the anvil stood on its pedestal. Yesterday, it had been lying on the floor. That was movement. Small, slow, but movement. He climbed up to the tower, opened the book, found the page with the map, took a candle stub from his bag, lit it. By candlelight, he jotted down a list in the margins of the book. Blacksmith's shop. Need line mortar to repair the pipe. Deadline, 3 days. Stable. Needs a roof. The brig can be built if there's lumber. Timeline unknown. Library. The interior staircase has collapsed. Not clear what's needed. Inspect. Barracks. Walls are intact. What's inside? Inspect. Chapel. Partially dismantled for lime. Restore later. Granary. Burn down. Rebuild. Expensive. Bridge. 3 of the 5 supports are destroyed. Without the bridge, there's no access to the southern fields or to Torfeld. He looked at the list. 8 buildings. 4 workers. Not a single mark. 4 months. The candle was burning down. Wax dripped onto the page of the book. He blew out the candle. Lay down. Mattress. The ceiling. A star. In the darkness, he thought about money. 11,000 marks is a huge sum. A peasant family lives on 15 to 20 marks a year. A knight earns 200. A minor baron 400 to 500. 11,000 is the annual revenue of a small town. How could a bankrupt lord end up with such a debt? He knew. In his past life, he had worked with government debts. Debt doesn't just appear on its own. It's created. Someone at court wanted the Grawald estate to change hands. They inflated the amount. They attributed debts to him. They set a deadline that was impossible to meet. A standard scheme. He'd seen it dozens of times. Back then, he'd been on the other side of the table. Back then, he'd been the one signing those papers. Renard closed his eyes. 4 months. He didn't yet know how he earned 11,000 marks, but he knew one thing. He was no longer sitting on that side of the table, and this time, he wouldn't walk away. It took 3 days to work on the chapel. Day 1. Brig and Talvin were dismantling the bottom row of masonry. The stones were hard to remove. Over the decades, the mortar had fused with the rock. Brig worked with a chisel. Talvin pulled out the blocks. Suno sat by the wall, chipping the stones down to the right size. Her legs still hurt, but her hands kept working. Renard and Morin hauled the stones to the kiln. Day 2. Firing. The kiln was operating at 1/3 capacity because of a crack in the flue. The stones heated slowly. Renard pumped the bellows for 6 hours straight. His hands went numb by noon. By evening, the first batch of limestone had turned white and begun to crumble. Brig checked it. She said it was good. Day 3. Mortar. Brig mixed lime with sand and water. Talvin had brought the sand from the stream in sacks, a 2-hour walk one way. 4 sacks. Brig said that would be enough. Renard stood below and watched as she filled in the crack. She worked calmly, steadily. The trowel, made from a flattened nail, moved back and forth. The mortar settled in an even layer. Not a single unnecessary movement. In a past life, Renard had seen the capital's finest masons at work. Brig was just as good. She was a village carpenter. But hands skilled with wood are also skilled with stone. The principle is the same. You feel the material with your fingers, not your eyes. By evening on the 3rd day, the chimney was sealed. Rig came down and said the mortar needed a day to dry. Then they could start a fire. Renard nodded. Day 4. Dawn. Renard stood before the forge. Morin and Talvin stood nearby. Brig sat on the amble's pedestal, sharpening an axe. Suno hobbled over to the woodpile. Renard loaded the forge. Coal. Wood chips. Dry branches. He struck a spark. The flames caught. He began pumping the bellows. Air rushed into the forge. The flames roared. The smoke rose upward. Into the chimney. All into the chimney. Not a single wisp escaped through the crack. The draft was full. The forge reached full heat in half an hour. The stones around the hearth were red hot. The air in the forge became hot and dry. Renard pumped the bellows and waited. Then he placed his hands on the anvil. The metal was warm from the heat of the forge. He didn't know exactly what was needed to finish the job. The well was considered complete when he removed all the stones. The forge. What does a restored forge mean? The forge is working. The chimney is intact. The anvil is in place. The bellows are pumping. The tools are where they should be. He took a hammer from the wall, a medium-sized one, not too heavy. He walked over to the anvil, raised the hammer, and struck. The clang of metal against metal filled the smithy, clear, loud, echoing off the walls and ceiling. Lines appeared in the air. The forge. Status restored. Strength +3. Applied. The blow felt like the first sip of water after a day of thirst. Not in his muscles. Deeper. Into his bones. Into his tendons. The hammer in his hand grew lighter. Not because the hammer had changed. His hand had changed. Renard raised the hammer again. With his arm outstretched, he held it. 10 seconds. 20. His hand didn't tremble. 3 days ago, he couldn't hold the hammer with one hand for more than 5 seconds. He set the hammer down and looked at his hands. Calluses. Dirt. Cracks on his knuckles. But beneath it all, he felt a solidity that hadn't been there before. 3 levels of strength. In the capital, that would have cost 1,800 marks. 3 vials of elixir at 600 each, and it wasn't even certain that his body would have tolerated the 3rd dose. He'd gotten it for free. For 4 days of work and a dismantled chapel. Morin stood by the door of the smithy. He looked at Renard with a strange look. Renard realized the old man had noticed something. Not the lines. Only he could see the lines. But Morin had noticed how his face had changed, how he held the hammer. The old man said nothing. He just stood there and watched. And in his eyes was something Renard hadn't seen before. Not respect. Not yet. But the beginning of attention. That moment when a person stops looking right through you and starts looking at you. Renard hummed the hammer on the wall. He turned to the others. Next stable. Briggs shook her head. A stable is a roof. A roof is logs. Logs are wood. The wood needs to be cut, then dried. Green wood isn't good for rafters. It'll sag in a month. Drying takes at least 2 weeks. Renard listened. 2 weeks to dry. He doesn't have 2 weeks to wait. He needs to build every day. He looked at the list in the book. The stable is waiting. What isn't waiting? The barracks. The walls are intact. What's inside? He hadn't checked yet. The library. The staircase has collapsed. But if the walls are intact... He turned to Brig. He asked if she could build a staircase. Brig looked at him. Then she said she was a carpenter and that staircases were what carpenters did. Renard almost smiled. Almost. He divided up the people. Moran and Suno are cutting wood for the future roof of the stable. The logs are drying while they work on other buildings. Talvin is going with him to inspect the barracks. Brig is going to the library to assess the staircase. The barracks stood behind the east wing of the tower. A long building. 1 story. Thick walls. Narrow windows. Military architecture. The door turned out to be locked. Talvin tugged at the handle. Renard tugged. It wouldn't budge. Locked or jammed. Renard took a step back. He looked at the hinges. Rusty, but intact. A padlock. Old. He remembered. In his past life, the treasury had stored documents dating back 300 years. The locks on the vaults were of the same type. They weren't broken open. They were opened by striking a specific spot, a manufacturing defect in this design. The latch inside the mechanism was 0.5 millimeter shorter than it should be. If you struck it from the bottom up at an angle, it would pop open. He picked up a stone. Aimed. Struck it from the bottom up. Nothing. Struck it again. Slightly to the left. The lock clicked and swung open. Talvin stared at it. For the first time in 4 days, an expression appeared on the silent young man's face. Surprise. Pure, unadulterated surprise. Renard removed the lock. He pushed the door. It creaked open. Inside the barracks, it was dark. It smelled of dust and something musty. Light from the narrow windows barely illuminated the space. When his eyes adjusted, he saw it. A long room. 20 bunks along the walls. Wooden frames, no mattresses. A table in the middle, chairs. A weapons rack on the wall. Empty. And at the far end of the barracks, a door. Another one. Renard walked across the room. His boots kicked up dust with every step. He reached the far door. He pushed it. It was open. Behind the door was a smaller room. There was a chest here. Just one. Wooden with iron strips. The lid wasn't locked. He lifted the lid. Inside were some belongings. A stack of papers. A leather belt with an empty sheath. A purse. He picked up the purse. It was heavy. He untied it. Inside were coins. Silver. He poured them out onto the table and began to count. 23 marks. 23 silver marks. The pay of the garrison that had once been stationed here. Forgotten. Or left behind. He looked at the 23 coins on the table. In the context of his debt, it was nothing. 11,000 minus 23. 10,977. But on the scale of Grawald, it was a fortune. A village family lives on 20 marks a year. He scooped the coins back into his purse. He picked up the papers. Then he froze. Lines in the air. Barracks. Condition. Discovered. Current status. Abandoned. To restore, it is necessary to clear the area and ensure a minimum of 5 sleeping berths are in place. He reread it. Interesting. The barracks required not repairs but restocking. The bunks were there, but without mattresses. 5 mattresses. Straw. Fabric. He could do that. Not today, but he could. He left the barracks. Talvin was waiting outside. Renard showed him his wallet. He said he found 23 marks. For the first time in 4 days, Talvin opened his mouth to say something unrelated to business. He said that 23 marks was more than Stenhall had seen in the last 3 years. Renard nodded. He knew. He also knew that these 23 marks couldn't be spent on himself. Every mark had to work. Every mark had to turn into a structure. Every structure had to turn into strength. He went to the library. Brig was standing at the entrance. She said the staircase had collapsed completely, all 3 flights. The wood had rotted, but the support beams in the walls were intact. She could build a new staircase in 4 or 5 days if she had lumber. But there was a problem. The first level of the library was empty. All the shelves had been made of wood and had rotted away. The books, if there were any, were on the upper levels, places he couldn't reach without a staircase. Renard went inside. The library turned out to be circular. It was built into the base of the tower on the eastern side. It was tall. 3 levels stretched upward. Balconies on each level encircled the wall. On the balconies, he could make out the outlines of shelves. Something was on the shelves, books, or boxes. He couldn't make it out from the floor. He tilted his head back and looked up at the ceiling. The roof was intact. That meant the books upstairs might have survived. Intelligence. If the library grants intelligence. In his past life, he knew the value of intelligence. A treasurer with a high level of intelligence could calculate 10 times faster than usual. He saw patterns that others didn't notice. He remembered numbers he heard just once. Intelligence +4 or +5 could change everything. He could see possibilities that were currently invisible, calculate scenarios on the fly, plan 10 steps ahead instead of 2. But first, the staircase. First, the tree. First, the time that doesn't exist. He stepped out of the library. The wind hit him in the face. He stood in the castle courtyard and counted. Not money. Days. The smithy has been restored, +3 units of strength. The stable needs to dry out, 2 weeks at least. The barracks require 5 mattresses, straw and cloth. For 23 marks, you could buy both. But where? The nearest town, Wineholm, is a 2-day journey away, 4 days for the round trip. The library needs a staircase. Wood is already being cut for the stable. Some of it could be used for the staircase. But Brig is alone, and she can't build the roof and the staircase at the same time. He needs more people. He needs Cord, the one who closed the door. Renard clenched his fists. New fists, with 3 levels of power in them. He felt no anger. He felt clarity. That evening, he sat on the floor of the tower and sorted through the papers from the barracks. Most turned out to be garrison reports from 10 years ago. Patrol rosters, rations ledgers, nothing useful. But one document caught his attention. A letter, unsigned, addressed to the commander of the Growald garrison. The text was brief. It stated that by order of the Crown Treasury's office, the Growald estate garrison was to be disbanded. All military expenses were to be written off. The amount of the write-off, 6,400 marks, was to be transferred to the estate owner's debt ledger. Renard read it 3 times. 6,400 marks out of an 11,000 mark debt. These were military expenses, not Lord Dunver's debt, nor his personal expenditures. They were the costs of maintaining the garrison, which the Crown had initially assumed and then transferred to the estate owner. He knew how this worked. He himself had signed such documents in his past life. A transfer of expenses, an accounting execution. You take a government expense item, you transfer it to a private owner. The amount from the national debt becomes a personal debt, legally, formally, and absolutely fatal for the person to whom it was transferred. Someone killed the Growald estate on paper long before its walls began to crumble. He set the letter aside from the rest of the papers. It was a weapon, small, blunt, but a weapon nonetheless. He didn't yet know how to use it, but he knew he would meet it. Renard left the castle at dawn on the 5th day. He was heading east toward Brickmer, toward Cord. 23 marks lay in the pouch on his belt. He had no intention of offering him money. Money doesn't work on people who are starving. A starving person will eat up the money in a week and be hungry again. A starving person needs a system, a steady source. He thought about this as he walked. In his past life, he had managed budgets thousands of times larger. He had distributed grain subsidies. He had allocated funds for road construction. He knew one thing that most officials didn't know. You can't give a man a fish. You can't even teach him to fish. You have to build a pond. Because without a pond, a fishing rod is useless. Brickmore greeted him with silence. Smoke was rising from a single chimney. Renard approached Cord's house. He knocked. The door opened. Cord stood in the doorway, the same broad shoulders, the same sullen face. But Renard noticed a detail he hadn't noticed the first time. His eyes. Red. The man hadn't slept well. Or hadn't slept at all. Renard didn't bother to say hello. He said he restored the forge at the castle. The bellows were working. The anvil was in place. The tools were there. He needed a blacksmith. Cord looked at him just as he had the first time, indifferently. He said he wasn't a blacksmith. Renard asked who he was. Cord replied that he used to be a miner. He worked at the mine in Wineholm. 3 years ago, the mine closed. He came here because his wife's house was here. His wife died 2 years ago. He was left with a child. Renard was silent. Then he asked what Cord could do. Cord said he knew how to break stone. Renard stood there looking at him. A man who knew how to break stone. On an estate where everything was made of stone. Where the bridge was made of stone. The walls were made of stone. The foundations were made of stone. Renard said he needed to restore the bridge over Grey Creek. 3 of the 5 supports had been destroyed. He asked if the former miner could work with stone masonry. Cord was silent for a long time. Then he said he could. Stone is stone. Breaking it or laying it, the only difference is the direction of the force. Renard nodded. Then he stated the reason for his visit. He didn't offer payment. He offered a share. The first harvest from the southern fields beyond the bridge. Torfeld, an abandoned village. The land beyond the bridge hadn't been cultivated for 3 years, but the land doesn't disappear. It just gets overgrown. If they cleared it and planted seeds in the fall, there'd be a harvest by next summer. Half the harvest from the southern fields. For Cord personally. Not a salary, not a handout, a share. Cord looked at him. His face was working. Renard saw it. He's thinking. A miner who's been stuck in a dead village for 3 years with a child in his arms. The garden yields just enough to keep from starving. It's 2 days to the nearest town. No work, no money. And now a young lord comes along and offers land. Not a promise. Land. Specific fields beyond a specific bridge. Cord asked, what if the bridge isn't rebuilt? Renard replied that the bridge would be rebuilt because Cord would rebuild it. Cord asked, what if the crops don't grow? Renard replied that the soil on the southern slope was black earth and that rye simply had to grow on black earth if it was sown. Cord asked how the Lord knew what kind of soil was on the southern slope. Renard fell silent. He knew because in his past life he had studied the land registry of the entire kingdom, every plot, every type of soil. It had been part of his job at the treasury, but he couldn't say that. He replied that he had read it in his father's book. Cord nodded. He didn't believe him. Renard could tell he didn't believe him, but Cord was the kind of person who cared more about what you were offering than why you knew it. Cord said he'd come tomorrow, alone. He'd leave the child with the old woman. Renard turned and walked back. Halfway there, he turned toward the stream. The gray stream turned out to be wider than he'd expected. Not a river, but not a ditch either, about 15 steps from bank to bank. The current was calm. The water was murky. A bridge stood a little further upstream. Or rather, what was left of it. 5 stone piers were supposed to support a wooden deck. The 2 outer piers were still standing. The 3 middle ones lay in the water. Piles of stone jutted out of the stream. The wooden deck had disappeared completely, either rotted away or swept away by a flood. Renard went down to the water's edge. The pier stones were large and hewn. Fine workmanship. Someone had once built this bridge with great care. It wasn't a flood or the passage of time that had destroyed it. He looked closely. Tool marks on the debris. Even. Relatively fresh. No more than 3 or 4 years old. Someone had deliberately destroyed the supports. Why? He straightened up and looked toward the south bank. Beyond the stream, a gentle hill rose up. Green. The grass was tall. Wild. But beneath the grass, the soil was black. He could see it. Good soil. On the hill beyond the field, he made out some rooftops. Torfeld. The southern village. Population, 0. Abandoned. He stood on the bank and thought. Someone had destroyed the bridge. Someone had cut off the southern village from the castle. Someone had disbanded the garrison and written off the expenses as debt. Someone had created conditions under which the Grawwald estate was doomed. This was no accident. It was a plan. Whose? He didn't know. Not yet. But he knew that every plan had a goal. And a goal has an author. And sooner or later, the author will come to check on the results. He returned to the castle after noon. Morin and Suno had returned from the forest. 6 logs lay against the wall. Fresh. Resinous. Brig was examining them. She said that at least 12 were needed for the rafters, and another reed to dry after being cut. For the staircase in the library, 4 thinner logs are needed. They could be taken from these 6 if they were cut down to size, but then only 4 logs would remain for the rafters. Renard made his decision instantly. 2 logs for the staircase. The remaining 4 will dry. In the week while drying, Morin and Suno will cut some more. Brig will start on the staircase tomorrow. Morin looked up. He listened as the young lord gave orders. Quickly, without hesitation. The old man had spent his entire life in Grauwald. He had seen 3 lords. The first was Renart's grandfather. He built things. The second was his father. He didn't build, but he didn't tear things down either. He simply disappeared. The third was this boy. He'd arrived 5 days ago. In 5 days, he cleared out the well, lifted the anvil, taken apart the chapel, fixed the chimney, found money in the barracks, and he gave orders as if he'd been doing it his whole life. Morin didn't understand, but he was beginning to respect him. That was the difference. Talvin returned from the forest later than the others. He brought back more than just firewood. 2 hairs hung from his shoulder. He silently set them down in front of Renart. The first meet in 5 days. Renart wanted to say thank you. He didn't. Instead, he said that today they would all eat together. Everyone. He built a fire in the courtyard. Suno gutted the hairs. Brig found a pot in the tower, an old one, cracked, but it held water. Renart brought water from the well, carrots from the old woman in Stenhall, which Morin had brought that morning along with an apology that there was nothing else. The stew simmered for an hour. They sat around the fire. 6 of them. Renart, Morin, Talvin, Brig, Suno, and the cauldron. They ate in silence. The stew was watery. The meat was tough. The carrots tasted bitter. It was the best meal Renart had ever eaten in this life. In his past life, he dined on porcelain with silver cutlery. He eaten dishes whose names took up 3 lines on the menu, and none of them had any taste, because he ate alone. Always alone. Even when dozens of courtiers sat around him, he ate alone. Here, 5 dirty, weary people sat around a campfire in the courtyard of a ruined castle and ate hare with carrots. And this was real. He didn't say it out loud, but he thought it. That's what he'd missed in his past life. Not the ring, not the system, not the stones. People. He'd missed people. When the fire burned out and the 4 of them set off along the trail north, Renart sat on the steps of the tower. The air had cooled. The stars came out. The same crack in the ceiling above. The same star. 5 days. The well, +2 in stamina. The smithy, +3 in strength. That's 2 and 3. General Corvain, the strongest man he'd known in his past life, had 12 in strength and 10 in stamina. Renart was at a quarter of Corvain's stamina and a quarter of his strength. In 5 days. Ahead of him lay the stables, the library, the barracks, the bridge, the granary, 3 villages with their structures, the inner wall and the outer wall. He stopped counting when his hands began to tremble. Not from the cold, from the sheer scale of what he was beginning to understand. Each structure was not just a building. Every structure was a step, and the Grauwald estate wasn't ruins. It was a staircase. A long one, a steep one, forgotten by everyone, but a staircase nonetheless. He stood up, entered the tower, climbed to the top, lay down. The mattress, the ceiling, a star. Cord will come tomorrow. Tomorrow the bridge will begin. Tomorrow Brig will start the staircase. Tomorrow he'll send Suno to Wineholm for fabric and straw for the mattresses in the barracks. 23 marks. Coarse fabric costs 2 marks per roll. You can get straw for free if you know where to look. 5 mattresses. 10 marks for the fabric. 13 will remain. 13 marks for everything else. He closed his eyes. Before falling asleep, he thought about the letter from the barracks. 6,400 marks in reallocated military expenses. Someone in the office had decided that the Grauwald estate must die. That someone didn't yet know that the estate had come back to life. And Renart didn't want him to find out just yet. For now. First, the walls. Then, the war. He fell asleep. He dreamed of a bridge, intact. 5 piers, a stone deck, and on the other bank stood a man. He couldn't make out his face, but Renart knew that this man was waiting. He didn't know for what, but he knew he had been waiting for a long time. Suno set off for Wineholm at dawn on the 6th day. His limp had almost gone away. Renart gave him 10 marks and a list. 5 pieces of coarse cloth, Fred, thick needles, salt, 2 pounds. If there's any money left, buy fat, any kind, for the furs in the smithy. Suno repeated the list twice. He mixed up the salt and the thread. Renart made him repeat it the 3rd time. Suno set off. 4 days for the journey, 2 there and 2 back. Cord arrived right at dawn, just as he promised. He stood at the castle gates and looked at the ruins with the expression of someone assessing the scope of the work rather than the beauty of the view. Renard led him to the bridge. Cord went down to the water. He walked among the debris of the supports for half an hour. He touched the stones. He tapped on them. He listened to the sound. Then he climbed back onto the bank and said 3 things. First, the stone is good. Granite, the same as in the castle walls. Second, the piers were demolished with a crowbar. The marks are clear. The person who did this knew what they were doing. They struck the joints between the blocks. The mortar crumbled, and the piers collapsed under their own weight. Third, the stones from the destroyed piers are lying in the water. The current didn't carry them away. They're too heavy. So the material is right here. We need to get the stones out of the water, clean them, rebuild them. We need mortar. A lot of mortar. Renard asked how long it would take. Cord looked at him, then at the bridge. Then he said that working alone, it would take him a month to build 3 supports. With 2 people, 2 weeks. With 3, 10 days. Renard nodded. 10 days. He didn't have 3 men for the bridge. Moran and Talvin were cutting wood. Brig was building a ladder. Suno had gone into town. Cord was alone. A month for the bridge. 1 month out of 4. A quarter of the total time for a single structure. He thought. He stood on the bank of the stream and thought. The wind rustled the grass. The water gurgled around the stone debris. In his past life, you would have solved this problem in 10 minutes. You would have hired a crew of masons. 20 men. A bridge in a week. Cost, 300 marks. He had 23 minus 10, leaving 13. Not enough for a crew. But he didn't need a crew. He needed speed. He turned to Cord. He asked what if he lifted the stones out of the water not with his hands but with a lever. Cord looked at him with an expression that said the young lord didn't understand how stone worked. He said that the stones in the water weighed 400 to 500 pounds each. They could be lifted with a lever, but the lever would have to be long. And the fulcrum would have to be sturdy. There was no fulcrum in the stream bed. The bottom was soft. Renard thought it through. Then he asked, what if we don't lift the stones out of the water? What if we build a support right in the water around the stones? Use the fallen blocks as a foundation. Cord fell silent. He looked at the debris in the water. Then he turned to Renard, and for the first time since they'd met, something other than indifference appeared on his face. Interest. He said it might work if they built a new wall around the fallen blocks right in the water. But mortar wouldn't set in water. They'd need a different binder. Renard knew what it was. In a past life, he'd seen a bridge being built across the Grey Channel in the capital. Clay mixed with ash and lime. It hardens even in water, slower than regular mortar, but it hardens. He told Cord about this without explaining how he knew. He simply said he'd read the recipe. Cord nodded. He was the kind of person who cared about the result, not the source of knowledge. They started that very same day. Cord worked waist-deep in the water. He lined the stones at the bottom with small fragments, forming the foundation. Renard hauled clay from the well. He mixed it with ash from the furnace and leftover lime. The result was a heavy gray mass. Cord packed it between the stones with his bare hands. The water was cold. By noon, Cord's hands had turned blue. He didn't stop. Renard noticed. He didn't stop. He didn't ask for a break. He didn't complain. He just worked. Silently. Methodically. Stone by stone. Renard worked beside him. Hauling, mixing. He passed them along. His 3 levels of strength allowed him to carry as much at a time as Cord, even though Cord's shoulders were twice as broad as his. Cord noticed this. He glanced over. He didn't say anything, but he noticed. By evening on the 6th day, the first of the 3 destroyed supports had a new foundation. Rough, ugly, but sturdy. Cord climbed out of the water. He was shivering from the cold. Renard built a fire on the shore. They sat by the fire. They were silent. Then Cord said one sentence. He said that the Lord worked like a convict. Renard replied that convicts work because they're forced to, but he works because he wants to. Cord looked at him for a long time. Then he nodded and went into Brickmore. Brig had been working all day in the library. When Renard returned to the castle, she was sitting at the entrance to the tower eating a piece of turnip. 2 planks lay nearby, sawn off from logs, hewn and smooth. She said the frame for the first span would be ready in 2 days. The steps would be ready in another 2 days. That made 4 days until the first level. Renard nodded. 4 days. He asked what the first level would hold. Brig didn't understand the question. He explained it differently. What was on the first level of the library? Brig said she hadn't gone up there. There was no staircase. But she'd seen it from below, shelves. There were things on the shelves, books or boxes. There aren't many on the first level. Most of them are on the second and third levels. Renard wondered, does the system count the restoration of the library by level or only as a whole? The forge counted as complete when everything was ready, the horn, the pipe, the anvil, the first blow of the hammer. The well counted as complete when he cleared away all the stones. The library. 3 levels, 3 staircases. He didn't know the answer. All he could do was keep building and see what happened. Morin and Talvin brought 4 more logs, 10 in total. He needed 12 for the stable's rafters. 2 more days of cutting, then 2 weeks of drying. The stable wouldn't be ready for at least 20 days. Renard stood in the castle courtyard at sunset on the 6th day and looked out over his estate. The word estate sounded like a mockery. A half-ruined tower, a smithy with a patched-up chimney, an empty roofless stable, a library without stairs, barracks without mattresses, a chapel missing its bottom row of masonry, a burned-down granary, a bridge missing 3 supports, 2 half-dead villages, 1 dead, 17 people, 11,000 marks in debt. No, 10,977, minus 6,400 if he can prove that the military expenses were improperly reclassified. 4,577. That's still a huge sum, but no longer impossible. He entered the tower, climbed to the top, sat down at the table, opened his father's book, flipped to the last pages. They were blank. He took a piece of burning coal from the brazier and began to write. The plan. Not for tomorrow, for all 4 months. Week 1. The smithy is ready. The bridge is under construction. The staircase is under construction. The forest is being cut down. Suno is in town. Week 2. The first level of the library. The barracks are fully staffed. The second bridge pier. The wood is drying. Weeks 3 and 4. The bridge is finished. Access to Torfeld. Inspection of the southern village. Stable. Roof. Month 2. Fields beyond the bridge. Grain storage. Inner wall. Month 3. Villages. Buildings in the villages. Barns. Wells. Fences. 4th month. Debt. He paused. Debt. Where would the money come from? 13 marks in his wallet. 23 minus 10 for Suno. The harvest from the southern fields, if planted, wouldn't be ready until next summer. Too late. He needed a source of income right now. He thought. In his past life, he generated income out of nothing. It was called financial engineering. Take an asset that no one values. Find someone who does value it. The difference is the profit. What assets are there in Grauwald? Stone, forest, water, land. Stone is everywhere. Forest is everywhere. Everyone has water. Land without people is worth nothing. He sat and thought. The ember in his hand was cooling. It was dark outside the window. The wind drove clouds across the stars. Then he froze. A smithy. A smithy without a blacksmith is just dead iron. But a smithy with a blacksmith means tools. Nails, horseshoes, staples, hinges, knives. Things every village within a 2-day journey needs. The blacksmith left 7 years ago. The nearest working smithy is in Wineholm. A 2-day journey. The peasants walk 2 days just for a single nail. If the smithy were restored not just as a building, but as a working workshop, he'd meet a blacksmith. But there isn't one. He placed a piece of coal in the fire. Lay down. A mattress. The ceiling. A star. A blacksmith. Where to find a blacksmith? In Wineholm. Suno is already there. But Suno went for fabric, not a blacksmith. And blacksmiths don't go to work in ruins for 13 marks. A blacksmith needs housing, food, tools, orders. Renard closed his eyes. A problem with no solution. For now. He knew from his past life that problems with no solution are problems missing a single element. When that element appears, the solution falls into place on its own. He needs to wait. No, not wait. Build. The missing element will appear because every new structure creates new possibilities. He fell asleep. He dreamed of a forge. The fire in the forge was white, so hot that the stones around it glowed. And lying in the fire was not metal, but paper. Paper with an official seal was burning. That very one. The promissory note. Days 7 through 9 passed in a rhythm that Renard was beginning to recognize. Dawn. Work. Sunset. Reckoning. Sleep. Dawn. The first cut. Cord stood waist-deep in water, laying the second support. His hands moved with a precision that comes only from thousands of hours of working with stone. He didn't say a word. He simply placed block after block. Renard passed him buckets of mortar. The gray mixture flew into the gaps between the stones. Cord pressed it in with his fingers. He checked it by touch. He set the next block. Second cut. Briggs stood on the framework of the first span and secured the steps. She worked alone. The hammer struck steadily, at regular intervals, like a metronome. Each step fit perfectly. Renard went into the library on the 8th day. 6 of the 12 steps were ready, sturdy. He stepped on the first one. It didn't even creak. Third section. Moran and Talvin were taking down the scaffolding. The last 2 logs for the rafters. 12 out of 12. Then they began preparing the planks for the decking. Fitter. More of them. Talvin worked in silence as always. Moran grumbled. But he grumbled differently than on the first day. Back then there had been indifference in his voice. Now it was the irritation of a man who was growing tired but knew why. A reaction. Day 9. Evening. Renard stood on the bank of the stream and looked at the bridge. 2 supports were in place. The third was half finished. Cord climbed out of the water. He was wet up to his chin, shivering, blue lips. Renard handed him a rag. Cord wiped himself off. Then he turned and looked at his work. 2 new supports stood between the 2 old ones, rough, darker than the old ones. But they stood. Water flowed around them and murmured. Cord said the third support would be ready in 3 days. Then they'd need decking. Wood. Renard nodded. Moran had the wood. Day 10. Suno returned from Wienholm. He arrived at noon. On his back he carried a bundle as big as himself. Fabric, thread, needles, salt, fat, and something else Renard hadn't asked for. Suno set the bundle on the ground and pulled a crumpled sheet of paper from his bosom. He handed it to Renard with the air of a dog that had fetched a stick and was waiting for praise. Renard unfolded the sheet. A notice. Posted on a board by the market in Wienholm. The text stated that a blacksmith named Helmer was looking for a workshop. He had his own tools. He was willing to work remotely. Contact the tavern by the market. Renard read it twice. He looked at Suno. Suno was grinning widely. He said he'd seen the notice and thought the Lord might need a blacksmith. Renard silently folded the paper and put it in his pocket. The missing piece. The very piece that had been missing. The task was taking shape. But 13 marks wouldn't be enough for a blacksmith. A blacksmith would want lodging, food, pay. Renard thought quickly. Lodging. The barracks. If the barracks were restored, they could be lived in. There were bunks. Mattresses could be provided. Food. Talvin brings in game. That could be arranged. Pay. That's where it gets trickier. A blacksmith from Wienholm won't work from your promises. But there was a phrase in the ad that caught Renard's eye. Own tools. A blacksmith who carries his own tools around is a blacksmith without a permanent home, a wanderer, or an outcast, or a man who's had a run of bad luck. A man like that doesn't need pay. Someone like that needs a workshop, a permanent one, his own, a place where his tools will finally hang on the wall and stay there until the next move. Renard could offer that. The forge was ready. The bellows were working. The anvil was in place. The workshop was ready. He just needed to get to Wienholm and convince this Helmer. But 2 days there and 2 back, that's 4 days. 4 days during which he wouldn't be building. 4 days without supervision. He looked at Moran. The old man was standing nearby, listening. Renard asked if Moran could keep an eye on the work for 4 days. Moran looked at him. For a long time. Then he asked where he was planning to go. Renard showed him the notice. Moran read it. His eyebrows rose. He said that if the young lord brought a blacksmith to Grauwald, Stenhall would no longer have to walk 2 days one way just to get nails. It wasn't permission, but it was approval. Renard left at dawn on the 11th day. Before leaving, he gave his final instructions. Brigg is finishing the staircase. Cord is building the third support. Moran and Talvin are preparing the decking for the bridge. Sumo is sewing mattresses. Suno looked at the fabric, the thread, and the needles. Then at Renard. His face expressed the despair of a man who had been given a task he had no idea how to do. Renard explained. 2 pieces of fabric. Sew them together on 3 sides. Stuff them with straw. Sew up the 4th side. Suno nodded. Slowly. Renard left. The road to Wienholm ran southwest. Past a stream, past a ruined bridge. Further on, through the hills. The trail was narrow but clearly visible. People didn't walk here often, but they did walk here. He walked quickly. 2 levels of endurance and 3 levels of strength made his body more efficient than that of an ordinary 19-year-old. Not stronger than an experienced soldier, but more enduring than a peasant. He didn't get tired for the first 4 hours. Then fatigue set in, but gently. Not like a wall, but like an uphill climb. He could keep going. By evening, he had covered more than half the distance. He spent the night under a tree. No fire, no food. He was saving the 3 pieces of dried meat Talvin had given him for tomorrow. He lay on the ground and looked up at the sky. Stars. Lots of them. More than could be seen from the castle. He thought about the blacksmith, about what he would say, about how to convince a stranger to follow him into the ruins. In his past life, he had persuaded dukes, ministers, generals. He knew the language of power and the language of money, but here he needed a third language, the language of need. He fell asleep under the open sky. On the morning of the 12th day, he entered Wineholm. The city was small by the standards of a capital. By Grauwald's standards, it was enormous. Stone walls, a market square, 3 streets, a tavern, a temple, the city guard barracks. People. Lots of people. Renard walked down the street and counted. A habit. Shops. Goods. Prices. Mails at the hardware store cost 3 copper coins apiece. In the capital, a copper coin bought a dozen, a 30-fold difference. A blacksmith in Grauwald could sell nails for 2 copper coins apiece and still be cheaper than in Wineholm. Horseshoes, 10 copper coins. In the capital, 2, a 5-fold difference. Staples, hinges, knives. Everything was several times more expensive than in the capital. The backwoods, far from production. It takes a week to transport every nail here. He found a tavern near the market. He went inside. It was dark. It smelled of beer and fried onions. 3 tables. 2 people were sitting at one. The second was empty. A man was sitting at the third, alone. Renard realized it was Halmer even before he approached. His hands gave him away. Large, dark with ingrained soot. Short nails, chipped, calluses upon calluses. Halmer was short, stocky, about 35 or 40 years old, a heavy-set face, a broken nose that had healed crooked, dark eyes. A mug stood in front of him, empty. Renard sat down across from him. Halmer looked at him, silently. Renard began to speak. He didn't mention the estate. He didn't describe the blacksmith's shop. He didn't make any promises. He asked one thing. How many months had Halmer been carrying his tools on his back? Halmer was silent for 10 seconds. Then he said 8. Renard asked why. Halmer replied briefly. The Wineholm Blacksmiths Guild. 2 masters. They won't let a third join. Not in the city or the surrounding area. He goes from village to village, repairs whatever they ask of him in exchange for food. 8 months. Renard nodded. The guild. A monopoly. He'd seen this 1,000 times in his past life. 2 masters who keep prices high because the third has nowhere else to go. He told Halmer that he had a smithy, worn, an anvil, bellows, walls, a roof, a chimney. Everything works. He needs a blacksmith, a permanent one. Halmer looked at him. His eyes narrowed slightly. He asked where. Renard answered, Grauwald, 2 days to the east. Halmer was silent. Renard could see the emotions playing across his face. Skepticism, distrust, then something else. Hope. A small bitter hope. The hope of a man who'd been deceived enough times not to believe, but not enough to stop wanting. Halmer asked what the pay was. Renard replied, 1/3 of everything he forges. 2/3 go to the blacksmith. Workshop and lodging are free. The estate provides the materials. Halmer finished off his empty mug, a mechanical gesture. Then he said that no one had ever offered him such terms, and that it meant one of 2 things. Either the forge is in ruins and the Lord is lying, or the Lord has given up hope. Renard smiled, for the first time in 12 days. He replied that the forge wasn't in ruins, but everything else was, and that he hadn't given up hope. He believed so. Halmer looked at him. Then he stood up. He said, "You go take a look." If the forge was as the Lord described, he'd stay. If not, he'd turn around and leave, and the Lord had better not try to hold him back. Renard nodded. They left the tavern at dawn on the 13th day. Halmer carried a bag of tools on his back. It was heavy, 100 pounds. He carried it as one carries a part of oneself out of habit, without complaining. 2 days back. Renard walked and thought. 2 days without work in Grauwald. Cord is alone on the bridge. Brig is alone on the stairs. Morin and Talvin are in the forest. Suno is sewing mattresses, or trying to. Every day counts. Every day is a stone missing from the wall. They arrived in Grawald at sunset on the 14th day. Halmer stopped at the gate. He looked at the stone pillars, at the rusty chain, at the sign. Then he looked further, at the road, at the wall with its breaches, at the tower. His face was expressionless. Renard said nothing. He didn't rush him. Halmer had to see for himself. They walked across the courtyard, the well. Halmer stopped. He bent down. He looked down. The water glistened. He scooped some up with his hand. He took a sip. He straightened up. He said nothing. He walked on. The smithy. Halmer stepped inside and became a different man. His back straightened. His pace slowed. He approached the forge. He ran his hand over the stone, then over the pipe, the patched-up one. He looked at the mortar joint and nodded, barely noticeably. He walked over to the anvil. He placed his palm on it, flat, broad, like placing a hand on the shoulder of an old friend. He stood there like that for 5 seconds. Then he took the bag off his shoulder, set it on the floor, untied it, took out a hammer, his own, not the one hanging on the wall, his very own. The handle polished by thousands of blows. The head was dark, heavy. He placed the hammer on the anvil. A ringing sound echoed through the smithy, clear, long. Halmer turned to Renard. He said one word, "I'm staying." Renard nodded. Something inside him gave way. Not joy, relief, like when a burden you've been carrying for too long and hadn't even noticed is finally lifted. Halmer began working the next morning, the 15th day. He worked in a way Renard had never seen before, neither in this life nor in the last. For the first hour, he went through every tool on the wall. He took down every hammer, every pair of pliers, every chisel. He examined them. He hung some back up. He set others aside, rusty but still usable. The unusable ones went into the corner. Then he stoked the forge. Not like Renard, differently, more precisely. He laid the coal in layers, coarse at the bottom, fine on top, with kindling around the edges. The fire caught evenly and burned strongly. He pumped the bellows with one hand while sorting through the metal with the other, old horseshoes from the stable, fragments of the gate chain, rusty nails. Any metal would do. By noon on the first day, he had forged 30 nails. Straight, identical. Renard stood in the doorway and watched. 30 nails. 2 copper coins apiece if sold cheaper than wine homes. 60 copper coins. 6 silver coins. Small change. But in a single day. Every day. 30 days a month. 180 silver coins a month just from nails. Minus a third for him as the smithy's owner. 60 marks a month. 240 in 4 months. Not enough to pay off the debt. But that's just nails. Horseshoes are more expensive. Staples are more expensive. Knives are even more expensive. He started counting and stopped himself. First, he needed a market. People needed to know there was a blacksmith in Grawald. He turned to Moran. The old man was standing behind him, looking at Halmer with an expression Renard had seen only once before, when Moran had tasted the water from the well. Surprise. Cautious. Skeptical. But surprise. Renard told Moran that he needed a favor. Every time someone from Stenhall goes to the neighboring villages or to the highway, let them say that there's a blacksmith working in Grawald. The prices are half those in Wineholm. Moran nodded. Then he added that his daughter-in-law goes to the highway once a week. She sells turnips to travelers. She'll spread the word. Halmer worked all day. By evening, in addition to the nails, he had forged 4 door hinges and 2 brackets. He laid everything out on the anvil in neat rows. Then he turned to Renard and asked where his room was. Renard led him to the barracks. 5 mattresses lay on 5 bunks. Renard looked at them and struggled to keep a straight face. They were mattresses, technically. 5 shapeless sacks stuffed with straw. The seams were crooked. One was already coming apart at the edge. Suno had tried his best. That much was clear. But sewing wasn't his forte. Halmer looked at the mattresses, then at Renard. His broken nose twitched. It was almost a smile. He said he'd been sleeping on the ground for 8 months. This sack of straw was a palace. He lay down. A minute later, he was snoring. Renard left the barracks. No lines appeared in the air. The barracks hadn't been checked off yet. He went over the requirements in his head. Cleanup and 5 sleeping spots. The cleanup was done. 5 mattresses were in place. But maybe the system required something else. He went back into the barracks. He looked around more carefully. Dust. On the floor. On the walls. on the bunks under the mattresses, cleaning. He hadn't cleaned up the dust. He'd only laid out the mattresses. On the morning of the 16th day, Renard grabbed a rag and a bucket. He spent 4 hours cleaning the barracks, the floor, the walls, the bunks, the table, the chairs, the weapon rack, the doorways, windowsills, the cracks between the stones. Dirty water splashed out bucket after bucket. Suno helped. He carried water. He changed the rags. By noon, the barracks were sparkling, relatively speaking. For a room that had stood closed for 10 years, it wasn't bad. The lines appeared when he wiped down the last windowsill. Barracks. Status restored. Defense +2. Applied. A blow. Different from the previous ones. Not to the muscles. Not to the bones. To the skin. That's exactly how he felt it. As if his skin had become denser. Thicker. He looked at his hands. Visually, nothing had changed. The same calluses. The same scars from the stones. But when he ran his fingernail across the back of his palm, it left no mark. It used to. Defense. 2 levels. He stood in the middle of the clean barracks and counted. Stamina 2, Strength 3, Defense 2. A total of 7 levels in 16 days. General Corvain. Strength 12, 10 in endurance. Renard didn't know how much defense he had, but he was already on his way, and there were at least 20 buildings ahead of him. Talvin stood by the barracks door. He had come to call Renard to dinner and caught him frozen in the middle of the room with his eyes closed and a strange expression on his face. Talvin said nothing, but when they sat down to eat for the first time ever, he looked at Renard not with wariness, but with something else. Not with respect, with attention. The kind of attention a hunter gives to a beast he cannot understand. This beast is not dangerous, but it is not like other beasts. And Talvin wanted to understand what kind it was. After lunch, Renard went to the library. Brig met him at the entrance. She said the staircase to the first level was ready. 12 steps, a railing, a landing at the top. Renard went inside. The staircase stood against the wall. New wood against the backdrop of old stone, light against dark. He set his foot on the first step. Sturdy. He climbed up. The second, the third. Each one held firm without a creak. Brig built just as she worked. Precisely. Without excess. He climbed up to the first level. A balcony encircled the wall. Stone railing. Intact. Shelves ran along the wall. Wooden. Partially rotten. But books stood on them. Not many. A dozen. Maybe a dozen and a half. He picked up the first one. Leather-bound. The pages were damp but not ruined. The title. The Land Code of Grawwald County, compiled during the reign of King Morven II. He opened it. Lists of lands. Boundaries. Rights. Tax rates. A century-old document. Useless. Or perhaps not, he thought. Tax rates from a century ago. If they differ from the current ones, that could be an argument. He set the book aside. He picked up the next one. Chronicle of the House of Ashters, Volume 2. He froze. A chronicle. The history of his own family. He opened the book. The pages were yellowed. The ink was faded but legible. He flipped through the pages. Names, dates, events. The construction of Grawwald Castle under Lord Chiron Asher. The building of a bridge across Grey Creek under Lord Bolton. The founding of the southern village of Torfeld. The expansion of the walls. The construction of the library. And one entry that made his heart sink. Lord Bolton Asher discovered the power of the ancestral stones in his 43rd year. Every structure erected on Grawwald's lands by the Lord himself strengthens the owner's body and spirit in proportion to the scale of the structure. The property is passed down through the bloodline. It affects only the direct heir. Keep it a secret. He closed the book. His hands were trembling, not from the cold. The property of the ancestral stones. His ancestors knew. They knew about the system, and they kept it a secret. And someone found out. Someone who disbanded the garrison, rewrote the debt, destroyed the bridge, cut off the village, created conditions under which no one would ever restore the estate. Someone wanted Grawwald to die, not for the land's sake, for the secret's sake, so that no one would ever find out that the stones of this estate grant power. Renard stood on the first level of the library, looking at the book in his hands. The lines hadn't appeared in the air. The library hadn't been counted. All 3 levels were needed, or perhaps something else was required. He went back downstairs. Brig was waiting. She asked what he found. Renard replied that he found books. Old ones. We need the upper levels. Brig nodded. The second flight of stairs would take another 4 days. The third, the same. 12 days until full access. He put the chronicle of the Asher's house into a bag and carried it to the tower. He placed it next to the letter from the barracks. 2 documents. A letter about a rewritten debt. A chronicle about the nature of the stones. 2 fragments of the same picture. Someone at court knew about the system. Someone destroyed the estate to bury the secret, or to take it for themselves. Renard sat on the floor of the tower and thought, if that person finds out that Grawald has come back to life, that people live there again, the forge is working, a bridge is being built, that the new heir didn't leave for the capital but stayed, that person will come, and he won't come with a letter. Renard looked at his hands. Endurance, 2. Strength, 3. Defense, 2. Not enough. Far too little for what was coming. Cord finished the 3rd pier on the 20th day. He climbed out of the water for the last time and sat down on the bank. His hands were worn down to the flesh. The water and stone had stripped the skin from his fingers until they were pink. He looked at the bridge. 5 piers stood in a row. 2 old ones and 3 new ones. The old ones were gray, smooth from time and water. The new ones were dark and rough with mortar oozing out. Unsightly, but sturdy. Cord knew that. Renard saw it. Laying the decking took another 2 days. Morin and Talvin hauled the planks from the stockpiled lumber. They were damp. Briggs said that damp decking would sag. Renard replied that a sagging floor was better than no floor at all. There was no other way across the southern fields to Torfeld. They laid the planks across the supports. They fastened them with staples that Halmer had forged. 22 staples in 2 days. Halmer forged them between orders. The first orders were already coming in. A farmer from the highway came for 3 horseshoes. He paid 24 copper coins. A woman from a village half a day's walk away came for a kitchen knife. She paid 8. Morin's daughter-in-law, standing on the highway with a turnip, told every passerby that there was a blacksmith in Grawald who charged less than Wineholm. People listened. Some came. The 22nd day. The bridge stood. Renard stood on it and looked down. Water rushed beneath the planks. The planks gave slightly beneath his feet, but they held. He took a step. Then another. He reached the other bank, the south bank. Grass up to his waist, wild, thick. The earth beneath his feet was black and soft. He walked across the overgrown field toward Torfeld. The village came into view after a quarter of an hour. 7 houses, all empty. The roofs had caved in on 3 of them. The remaining 4 were still standing. Stone walls, empty windows. The doors had been removed. By someone, for some reason. Renard walked around every house. Inside, they were empty. No furniture, no household goods, no signs of life. The people had left and taken everything with them. Or they'd been driven out and everything had been taken from them. He approached the center of the village. There was a well here, filled in with earth. Not with stones like at the castle, with earth. Someone had filled it in with a shovel. Next to the well stood a structure that wasn't on his father's map. Low. Stone. Windowless. A single door. Heavy. Wooden. With iron bars. Renard pushed the door. Locked. He walked around the structure. The walls were thick. The stone was different. Not granite like at the castle. Dark. Almost black. He'd never seen stone like this in Grawald. Lines flashed in the corner of his eye. Structure unknown. Type undetermined. Status sealed. Inspection of interior spaces required for identification. Sealed. Not locked. Sealed. The difference is enormous. A lock can be broken. A seal must be removed. He stood before the sealed structure in the deserted village and felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. Something was hidden here. Something that wasn't marked on any map. He returned to the bridge. Cord was waiting for him on the north bank. Cord stood there, looking at his bridge, at his work. 3 piers in the water. Every stone laid by his own hands. 22 days. Waist-deep in cold water. Skin-stripped fingers, blue hands. Renard stopped beside him. They stood in silence. Then Cord said the bridge was finished. Renard nodded. The bridge stood. And at that moment, the lines flashed brighter than ever. Bridge over Grey Creek. Condition restored. Endurance +3. Strength +2. Applied. A double blow. The first to his lungs. His breathing grew deeper, wider, as if his ribcage had expanded by an inch. The second to his arms and shoulders. His muscles grew denser. He could feel it beneath his skin. Not bulk. Density. The same arms, but heavier. Stronger. He clenched his fist, unclenched it, clenched it again. His fingers clenched with a strength he'd never had before. Stamina 5, Strength 5, Defense 2, 12 levels total, in 22 days. He looked at Cord. Cord was looking at him. Strange. He saw something. Not lines, but something. Maybe he saw how Renard's posture had changed, how his shoulders had straightened, how his gaze had changed. Cord didn't say anything. He just nodded. And in that nod was more than in all the words they'd exchanged over the past 22 days. Renard returned to the castle. That evening, he sat in the tower and updated his entries in the book. The bridge has been restored. Access to Torfeld is open. An unknown sealed structure has been discovered. Type undetermined. Torfeld, 7 houses. 4 are repairable. The well has been filled in. Population, 0. The southern fields are accessible. Black soil, suitable for planting. But the planting season has passed. Fall planting of winter crops in 2 months. If the fields are cleared by then, if seeds are found, if people are found to do the planting. He did the math. Halmer's smithy brought in about 2 marks a day, sometimes 3. Orders were on the rise. Word was spreading around the district. In a month, it would be 5 or 6 marks a day. In 2 months, a steady 10. 300 marks in 4 months. His share, 100 marks, plus the remaining 13. 113 marks. The debt, 4,577, after deducting the recorded expenses. A drop in the bucket. He needed another source of income, a much larger one. He lay on the mattress and stared at the ceiling, a star in a crack. 22 days had passed out of 120. 98 remained. Almost a third of the term had been spent on the base, the well, the smithy, the barracks, the bridge, 4 buildings, 7 levels. Ahead lay the stables, the library, the sealed-off building, Torfeld with its 4 houses and well, Stenhall with its buildings, Brickmore, the castle walls, the granary. He fell asleep counting buildings the way others count sheep. The 23rd day began with rain, the first in a long time. The rain fell steadily and heavily from the gray sky. It was impossible to work outside. Renard sat in the tower and read the chronicle of the Asher family. He was looking for a mention of the black stone. The building in Torfeld was not made of granite, not of limestone, of something else. Something dark, almost black. He flipped through the pages, pale ink, an ancient language. There were some words he didn't understand. He skipped them. He moved on. On page 43, he found it. An entry by Lord Kieran Asher, the one who built the castle. The text was brief. A vein of glass stone has been discovered beneath the southern village. The stone cannot be cut with ordinary tools. Only fire and water used simultaneously. The vein extends deep underground. A vault has been erected from the stone. Its purpose is experimental. When used in masonry, the stone's properties amplify the effect of ancestral structures by 1.5 times. Keep this a secret. He reread it. 1.5 times. Structures made of black stone provide 1.5 times more amplification. He looked out the window. Rain. Outside the window were gray hills, and somewhere beyond them lay Torfeld with its black vault. If you were to open the sealed structure, if you were to understand what was inside, if you were to start building with this stone. He stood up. Rain or no rain, he needed to go to Torfeld. He went down into the courtyard. Halmer was working in the smithy. The pounding of the hammer didn't stop even in the rain. Renard walked past. Brigg was sitting under the stable's awning, hewing a beam for the second flight of the staircase. She worked in any weather. The rain bothered her no more than the sun. Renard walked out through the gate and headed for the bridge. The road had turned to mud. The mud came up to his ankles. The bridge was wet. The planks were slippery. He crossed carefully. On the south bank, the grass lay flattened by the water. It became harder to walk. He reached Torfeld in 20 minutes. The village looked even more lifeless in the rain than on a sunny day. Water ran down the walls of the empty houses. It dripped through the collapsed roofs. It gurgled in the ditches. He approached the sealed-off building. The black stone glistened with water. Wet, it looked even darker, almost alive. The door. Heavy. Wooden with iron strips. He examined it again. Last time, he pushed it and walked away. Now he looked more closely. Iron strips. 4 of them. Horizontal. Wood between them. Oak. Old. Darkened. But sturdy. There was no lock, neither a surface-mounted one nor a mortise lock. The door wasn't locked with a latch. It was secured differently. He ran his hand over the wood, over the iron, over the stone around the doorframe, and he felt it. In the stone to the left of the door at chest level, there was a recess. Small, round, about the diameter of a finger, deep. He peered inside. It was dark. He couldn't see the bottom, but he could sense it. Something was waiting in that recess. A key. Not a metal one, something else. He recalled an entry from the chronicle. Only fire and water at the same time. Fire and water. He stood in the rain in front of the sealed door and thought. Fire and water at the same time. A burning object in water. Or a red-hot stone doused with water. Or steam. He didn't know. Not yet. He turned around and headed back. Halfway to the bridge, he stopped. Someone was standing on the north bank. A man. On a horse. Renard froze. He hadn't seen a single horse in 23 days. There were no horses in Grauwald. None in Stenhall. None in Brickmore. A horse meant only one thing. The man had come from far away. He moved closer. The rider sat motionless on his horse. Rain ran down his cloak. A dark cloak. Fine fabric. Not a peasant's. Not a soldier's. A bureaucrat's. The rider was looking at the bridge, at the new supports, at the fresh planks of the deck. Renard crossed the bridge. He stopped 10 paces from the rider. The rider turned his head. His face was gaunt, angular. His eyes were gray, cold. A badge glinted on his chest beneath the cloak. The Crown Land Tax Office. A tax collector. Renard recognized that badge. In his past life, he had issued such badges. Himself, personally. He had signed permits for travel to the provinces. He had approved lists of debtors. The collector looked at Renard, from top to bottom. From horseback down to the man on foot. He asked who he was. Renard gave his name. Renard Asher, heir to Grauwald. The collector took a scroll from his saddlebag. He unrolled it, shielding himself from the rain with the hem of his cloak. He said he had arrived for an interim assessment of the estate's condition. The first payment was due in 67 days, 2,750 marks, the first of 4 installments. Renard stood in the rain and listened. 2,750 marks in 67 days. Not 11,000 all at once in 4 months. 4 installments. That changed everything. Not for the better. The collector continued. He said he was required to inspect the estate and assess the current value of the property. If the value of the property was lower than the amount of the first installment, the Crown had the right to initiate foreclosure proceedings early. Renard listened. It was cold inside. Not because of the rain. Early repossession. If this man saw the ruins and valued them at less than 2,750 marks, the estate would be taken away. Not in 4 months. Right now. He looked the collector in the eye. 14 years at court. 14 years among people who trade in words the way others trade in grain. He knew this type. The assessor. A minor official. Doesn't make decisions. Follows instructions. But there are loopholes in the instructions. There are always loopholes. Renard said he'd be happy to show the estate, but he suggested starting with the smithy. The collector raised an eyebrow slightly. The smithy was in operation. The hammer hadn't stopped striking even as they approached. Halmer was forging. The forge was blazing. The metal rang out. Heat radiated from the doors. The collector dismounted. He tied up his horse. He entered the forge. Halmer didn't even look up. He was the kind of craftsman who doesn't notice visitors while the metal is hot. A blank for an axe lay on the anvil. Finished products hung on the wall. Nails, staples, hinges, 2 knives, and horseshoes. The collector surveyed them. His expression didn't change, but Renard saw how his eyes moved, counting, assessing. A working smithy in the middle of nowhere is an asset. Real, measurable. Renard led him further. A well, water, clean. The collector scooped some up, tasted it, nodded. Barracks, clean, 5 bunks, mattresses, a table, chairs, housing. The collector jotted it down on his scroll. Then Renard showed him the bridge. New, fresh, 5 supports, wooden planks, access to the southern fields. The collector stared at the bridge for a long time. Then he turned to Renard. His expression shifted slightly, just a tiny bit, a hint of surprise. He said that in the last report 3 years ago, the bridge had been listed as impassable. Renard replied that 3 years ago, it hadn't been there. The assessor wrote something down on his scroll. Then he asked for the heir's own estimate of the total value of the property. Renard named a figure, 3,200 marks. The working smithy with a blacksmith, 1,000. The bridge, 500. Land with access to the southern fields, 800. The well, barracks, and outbuildings, 900. The assessor made a note. Then he said he would return in 30 days for a reappraisal before the first installment was due. If the value of the property increases, the Crown might consider a deferral. If not, the seizure procedure will begin automatically. He mounted his horse and rode away. Renard stood in the rain and watched as the dark figure on horseback disappeared over the hill. 30 days. He had gained 30 days. He hadn't won. He had bought some time. But the tax collector had seen the bridge. The tax collector had seen the smithy. The tax collector would write a report. The report would reach the chancellery. There, someone would read that the Grauwald estate had come back to life, that the heir had not left, that bridges were being built. The forges are operating. That very someone, the one who reclassified the military expenditures, the one who knows about the properties of the stones, now will find out that Renard stayed. Renard entered the tower. He went upstairs. He sat down. His hands were wet, cold. He clenched them into fists, 5 levels of power in each fist. It won't be enough. He knew that someone more formidable than the collector would arrive soon. And by then, he needed to be stronger, much stronger. He opened the book, found the list of structures, counted the ones that could be restored in 30 days. The stable, the roof, the logs are drying. In a week, the rafters can be put up, the library, the staircase to the second level. 4 more days. Torfeld. 4 houses. The well. It could be cleared out in a week if everyone were put to work on it. The sealed-off building. The key. Fire and water. He wrote down a plan for 30 days. Then he crossed it out. Rewrote it. Crossed it out again. The 3rd version. Every day is scheduled. Every person is assigned. Every stone is accounted for. 30 days. He didn't know yet that in 12 of those 30 days, it wouldn't be a tax collector who would arrive at the gates of Grauwald, but a man with a seal that Renard remembered from his past life better than his own face. For 12 days after the collector's visit, Renard worked as if every hour were his last. First cut. Brake had finished the 2nd flight of stairs in the library. 12 steps. A landing. A railing. There were more books on the 2nd level. 3 full shelves. Renard climbed up and began sorting through them. Land surveys, tax records, lease agreements dating back a century, and 1 thin book with no title on the cover. He opened it. Schematics, blueprints, drawings of structures with annotations. Each structure was accompanied by a list of attributes it would provide upon restoration. A well, stamina, blacksmith's shop, strength, barracks, defense, stable, speed, library, intelligence, bridge, stamina and strength, chapel, recovery, granary, stamina, wall, defense, and a dozen more structures that didn't exist in Grauwald. Watchtower, perception, training yard, strength and speed, infirmary, recovery, market square, intelligence. He flipped through the pages and his hands grew cold. It was a catalog, a complete catalog of the system, compiled by one of his ancestors. Every building, every characteristic, every restoration condition. And on the last page, a note in different handwriting, more recent. The same hand that had crossed out entries in his father's book. If the enemy finds out about this document, he'll come for it personally. Hide it higher up. Renard closed the book. Hide it higher up. The 3rd level. One of his ancestors knew the document was being hunted and moved it up to the 2nd level, but not to the 3rd. So he didn't make it in time. Or couldn't. Or was stopped. 2nd cut. The stable got a roof. Brigg and Talvin spent 2 days putting up the rafters. The logs dried out in 2 weeks. Not completely. Brigg grumbled that the roof would sag in a year. Renard replied that in a year he put up a new one. Right now, he needed a roof that would hold up today. When the last board was laid on the rafters, the lines flashed. The stable. Status restored. Speed +3. Applied. He felt the speed in his legs. Not faster. Lighter, as if the ground had moved a little closer to his feet, as if the extra fraction of a second between one step and the next had been removed. 3rd cut. 4 houses in Torfeld. Renard threw everyone at them. Moran, Talvin, Suno, Cord. Even Halmer came out for half a day between jobs. The roofs on 3 houses. Doors, windows boarded up, not pretty, but sealed off. The well in the center of the village was cleared out in a day. Renard dug it himself. The earth came away easily, soft. Someone had filled it in recently, maybe 3 years ago, when they demolished the bridge. Water appeared at a depth of 4 cubits, murky at first, that it cleared up. Lines. Torfeld. South well. Condition restored. Endurance +1. Each of the 4 houses provided its own boost when a door and roof were installed. First house. Defense +1. Second. Stamina +1. Third. Strength +1. Fourth. Intelligence +1. Renard stood in the middle of the dead village and calculated. Stamina 7. Strength 6. Defense 3. Speed 3. Intelligence 1. 20 levels total. General Corvine had 12 strength. Renard had 6, half that of the kingdom's finest warrior. In 35 days. Reaction. Morin stood by the restored well and looked at the water. Then he raised his head and looked at Renard. The old man had watched the young lord change day by day. How his movements had grown faster. How he carried stones he previously been unable to lift. How his boyish face had changed. Harsher. Older. Not from age. From something inside. Morin didn't understand what was happening, but he stopped doubting. After 35 days, he stopped doubting that this man would not leave. On the 35th day, a rider approached the gates of Grauwald. Not the tax collector. Someone else. Renard saw him from the roof of the stable, where he was helping Briggs secure the gutter. The rider was coming down the road from the highway. Alone. A black horse. A dark blue cloak. No badge on his chest. A seal. A gold one. On a chain. Renard climbed down from the roof. He stood by the gate. He waited. The horseman rode up. He stopped. Dismounted. Tied his horse to a post. Turned toward Renard. The face. Renard knew that face. Not from this life. From a past life. A man of about 50. Tall, thin, gray hair. Cut short. Light-colored eyes. Almost colorless. A long nose. Slender. Narrow lips. The face of a man who judges people not by their names but by their worth. Viscount Darren, Deputy Chancellor of the Treasury, the 3rd highest-ranking official in the kingdom's financial hierarchy. In his past life, Renard had worked for him for 7 years. For 7 years, he carried out his orders. He rewrote debts. He ruined estates. He falsified appraisals. For 7 years, he was a tool in this man's hands. And when the tool became too expensive and too well-informed, Darren sent another tool, with a knife, between the 3rd and 4th ribs. Renard stood before the man who had killed him in his past life and looked him in the eyes. His hands didn't tremble. His voice didn't tremble. Inside, there was an icy calm he hadn't expected from himself. Darren looked at him. His eyes slid over his face, his hands, his clothes, assessing him. Just as he assessed every person he met, Darren said he received the collector's report and decided to visit the estate in person. He said he was impressed. The bridge, the blacksmith's shop, the village on the south bank. For a 19-year-old heir to a ruined house, that wasn't bad. Renard listened and counted the words, every single one. In his past life, he had known Darren's language. Every word had a hidden meaning. Impressed meant concerned. Not bad meant too good. Decided to visit personally meant I trust no one. Darren asked to be shown around the estate. Renard showed him. The same buildings he'd shown the collector. The blacksmith's shop, a well, barracks, a bridge. But Darren looked at them differently. Not at the buildings. At the stones. His eyes lingered on the masonry, on the walls, on the foundations. He touched the stones, ran his fingers along the joints. Renard saw it. He knows. Darren knows about the properties of the stones. They were standing in the castle courtyard. Darren looked at the tower. Then he turned to Renard. He said he had a proposal. The crown was prepared to write off the entire debt, all 11,000 marks, with no strings attached, in exchange for the voluntary transfer of the estate to the management of the crown administration. Renard would be retained as the nominal owner. The title would remain. The land would formally belong to him, but management and construction would pass to an appointed royal steward. Renard remained silent. He knew what that meant. The royal steward would carry out the construction. The stones would strengthen the lord. But Renard would not be the lord. The system was designed for a direct heir. If management passes to the crown and the steward does the building. He looked at Darren. There was no threat in the Viscount's eyes. No pressure. Only confidence. The confidence of a man who knows his offer is more advantageous than the alternative. and the alternative is confiscation in 67 days. Renart replied that he needed time to think it over. Darren smiled, subtly. He said he'd give him 5 days. Then he mounted his horse and rode away. Renart stood at the gate and watched him go. 5 days. Darren doesn't know the most important thing. The system only works for the direct heir. If Renart signs the transfer of authority, the stones won't empower the overseer. They won't empower anyone. Darren thinks he can seize the stone's power through bureaucratic channels. He's wrong. But if Renart refuses, Darren will come to take them by other means. Renart entered the tower. He sat down on the floor. He rested his hands on his knees. He looked at them. 20 levels. That's not enough to stand up to a viscount who has an army of officials, guards, and the entire treasury at his disposal. But Renart had something Darren didn't. He knew that Darren was wrong. And an enemy's mistake is a weapon that doesn't need to be forged. 5 days. Renart spent the first one in the library. Brig had finished the 3rd flight of stairs. 12 steps. A landing. A railing. The 3rd level. Renart climbed up. It was cramped on the 3rd level. A low ceiling. Shelves along the walls. Books on the shelves. Lots of them. 30. Maybe 40. A thick layer of dust covered everything. No one had been up here for decades. He began sorting through them. Book by book. Chronicles. Registers. Treaties. Maps. One book was unlike the rest. Small. In a black binding. Untitled. He opened it. Inside was a single text. Short. Written in the same handwriting as the note on the last page of the building catalog. To whoever is reading this, if you are an heir to the blood of the Ashters, you already know about the properties of the stones. If you have found this book, it means you have ascended to the 3rd level. It means the library has been restored. It means you have received what it offers. Use it. The vault in the southern village contains the tools of the first builder, the ones used to erect the castle. The key to the vault is not an object. The key is an action. Heat a stone from the vein until it glows red, and douse it with water. The steam will open the door. This is written by Balton Asher, the 4th Lord of Grauwald, the one who discovered this property, the one who built the vault, the one they tried to kill for this knowledge. I don't know who's behind this, but I know he's at court. I know he wants to take the power of the stones. I know he won't succeed because the power flows only to the blood. But he won't stop. If you're reading this, it means I didn't make it in time. Finish it. Renart closed the book. His hands didn't tremble. The lines flashed. Library. Status fully restored. Intelligence +5. Applied. A jolt shot through his head. No pain. Clarity. As if someone had wiped clean the dirty glass through which he'd viewed the world his whole life. His thoughts became sharper. Faster. Connections between facts revealed themselves. Darren knew about the stone's properties. Darren killed Lord Balton or ordered his killing. Then he destroyed the estate so that no heir would learn the secret. He disbanded the garrison. He rewrote the debt. He destroyed the bridge. But he couldn't destroy the stones. The stones stand. The stones wait. He needed an heir who would come, restore the estate, and become so powerful that he could be used as a weapon, as a tool. No. Renart stopped the thought. He restructured it. 6 levels of intelligence work like gears that had fallen into place for the first time. Darren doesn't want to use the heir. Darren wants control of the estate. If he has control, he controls what gets built and when. He controls the power, not his own, but the heir's. But if the heir is under his control, the heir's power becomes Darren's power. A puppet with 20 levels of enhancement. 30, 40. Not a soldier, not a general. A weapon. That's why. That's why Darren didn't destroy the estate completely. That's why he left the heir alive. That's why he came in person. Renart descended from the 3rd level. His legs carried him faster than before. 3 levels of speed and 6 levels of intelligence made every step precise. He stepped out of the library. He looked up at the sky. 4 days until the answer. He needed to open the vault. Today. He went to the forge. Halmer was working. Renart asked him to heat a piece of black stone. Halmer looked up. He looked at the stone Renart had brought from Torfeld. Dark. Heavy. Almost black. Halmer picked it up with tongs. Placed it in the forge, pumped the bellows. The stone didn't change. 5 minutes, 10, 20. Halmer added more coal, increased the airflow. 30 minutes. The stone began to change color, not red, white. It glowed white hot. Halmer said he'd never seen a stone like it. It didn't melt. It just got hotter and hotter. Renart took the tongs. Halmer stepped back. Renard carried the red-hot stone across the courtyard, through the gate, down the road, over the bridge, across the field, and back to Torfeld. The stone glowed white. The heat came in waves. The grass around his feet withered and curled. The tongs grew hot. The metal burned his palms even through 2 layers of protection. He ran to the vault. He inserted the red-hot stone into the recess by the door. The stone fit perfectly, like a key in a lock. Then he scooped up water from the cleared well, a bucket, full. He raised it above his head. He poured it onto the stone. Steam erupted, white, thick, hot. Renard recoiled. Steam filled the entire space in front of the door. He couldn't see a thing. He could only hear the hissing of water on the scorching stone. Then the hissing subsided. The steam began to dissipate. The door was open, wide open. It was dark inside. He stepped inside. The vault turned out to be larger than it had appeared from the outside. Stone steps led downward. He descended them. 10 steps, 20. The air grew cool, dry. At the bottom, a room opened up. Square. Walls of black stone. Floor of black stone. Ceiling of black stone. In the center stood a workbench, made of stone. Tools lay on the workbench. A hammer, a chisel, a measuring ruler, a level, a plumb line, all made of the same black stone. Next to the workbench stood a chest, open. Inside lay blocks, black, hewn, perfectly smooth. 32 blocks, building material. The very same material that boosts the properties of structures by 1.5 times. Lines flashed. The first builder's vault. Status, unsealed. Intelligence +3. Strength +2. Applied. The first builder's tools are available. Structures built from glass stone provide a 1.5 times boost to the base value. Renard stood in the vault and calculated. Stamina 7. Strength 8. Defense 3. Speed 3. Intelligence 9. 30 levels. 30. In 36 days. General Corvain had 12 strength and 10 stamina. 22 in total, counting only those 2 stats. Renard had 8 strength and 7 stamina. 15. But he also had defense, speed, and intelligence, a total of 30. He looked at the tools, at the blocks of black stone, at the walls of the vault. 4 days until he had to give Darren an answer. He could meet 4 days. He needed 1. Renard worked all night. He carried 4 blocks of black stone from the storeroom to the castle. Each weighed about 100 pounds. With 8 levels of strength, he carried 2 at a time. Before, he wouldn't have been able to lift even 1. He knew what he was doing. 9 levels of intelligence had turned a vague plan into a precise blueprint. The castle's inner wall. 3 breaches. Each 2 or 3 paces wide. 4 blocks would be enough to seal 1 breach. Not all 3, just 1. But the system should count it as a partial restoration of the wall if at least the critical section was closed off. Or maybe not. He didn't know. But he had to try. He worked by moonlight, a mortar of clay, ash, and lime, the same one Cord had used on the bridge. The blocks fit together smoothly, black stone against gray granite, out of place, noticeable, but sturdy. By dawn, the breach had been sealed. 4 blocks of glass stone stood in the wall of Grawald Castle. The lines flashed. Inner wall. Status. Partially restored. 1 of 3 breaches sealed with glass stone. Defense. +4. Base value, 2. Multiplier, 1.5. Total, 3. Rounded up. +1 bonus for the material. Applied. 4 levels of defense. In a single night. The glass stone didn't just provide 1.5 times the defense. It provided an additional bonus on top of that. Renard sat down on the ground by the wall, his back to the black blocks. Defense, 7. He ran his fingernail across the back of his palm. His fingernail didn't leave so much as a hint of a mark. He tried pinching the skin on his forearm. It hurt, but the skin barely budged, tight, like tan leather. He stood up. Overall stats. Stamina 7, Strength 8, Defense 7, Speed 3, Intelligence 9, 34 levels. In the morning, he gathered everyone together. Moran, Talvin, Brigg, Suno, Cord, Halmer. 6 of them. All 17 residents, if you counted the elderly, the children, and the cripple, knew that something was happening in Grawald. But these 6 saw it every day. They saw how the young lord was changing. Renard told them the truth. Not all of it, just part of it. He said that in 3 days, a man from the capital would arrive. A man with great power. This man wanted to take the estate, not through the law, through force. Renard said he would not give up Grawald. He asked which of them would stay. Morin answered first. He said that Stenhall had survived 3 changes of lords. Stenhall would survive a 4th one as well. But this lord was the first to repair the well. Stenhall would stay. Cord was the second to speak. Briefly, he said the bridge was still standing. The bridge was his job. He wouldn't abandon his work. Brigg nodded, without a word. Talvin looked at his father, then at Renard. He nodded. Suno said he would stay because the mattresses in the barracks were his responsibility, and he didn't want a stranger sleeping on them. Halmer was silent the longest. Then he said he carried his tools on his back for 8 months. Here, his tools were on the wall. He wouldn't take them down again. Renard nodded. 6 of them. Not an army, not a squad. 6 working men in a ruined estate, but 6 who had decided to stay. He spent the next 2 days preparing, not for battle, for a conversation. In his past life, he'd known Darren for 7 years. He knew his habits, weaknesses, fears. Darren feared one thing: publicity. Everything he did in the shadows. Re-registered debts, ruined estates, disappeared people. All through paperwork, through intermediaries, through formal procedures. Not a single one of his orders was ever recorded directly. If someone were to bring his schemes to light, if someone were to reveal the connection between the rewritten debts and specific estates, if someone were to discover a pattern, Darren would collapse, because above him stood the Chancellor, and above the Chancellor the King, and the King did not tolerate theft, not out of morality, out of pragmatism. A thief in the treasury is a hole in the crown's pocket. Renard gathered the documents, a letter from the barracks regarding rewritten military expenditures, the chronicle of the Astor's house, a catalog of buildings from the 2nd tier of the library, the land code from the 1st tier, tax records from a century ago where the rates for Grawald were half what they were currently. A letter from Baltino from the 3rd level. He laid everything out on the table in the tower and studied it. 9 levels of intellect were at work. Connections revealed themselves. Military expenses had been reallocated to the owner in the same year the garrison was disbanded. The bridge was destroyed a year later. Grawald's tax rate was tripled compared to the historical rate, with no reason given. Every step led to a single outcome. The estate was meant to become uninhabitable. The heir was meant to renounce his claim. The land was meant to pass to the crown, and from the crown to whoever controlled the crown office, to Darren. But Darren couldn't build it himself. The power flowed only to the blood of the Ashtors. So he changed his tactics. If he couldn't take the land, he had to take the heir. Control of the estate. Control over what was being built. The heir as a puppet. Renard stacked the documents in a pile. He tied them with a cord. He put them in a leather bag. This was his weapon. Not a sword, not magic. Paper. On the 3rd day of the 5, he did something else. He carried the remaining 28 blocks of glass stone from the vault to the tower's basement. 2 blocks per trip. 14 trips across the field, over the bridge, through the courtyard, and down the stairs. 7 hours of non-stop work. 8 levels of strength and 7 levels of stamina allowed him to do what no ordinary person his age could. The blocks lay in the tower's basement. 28 of them. Building material. Each block represented potential walls. Each wall represented reinforcement. He didn't start building with them just yet. It was too early. Darren first. Then the stones. He went upstairs. Lay down. Mattress. The ceiling. A crack. A star. The same star. He recognized it now. The 9 levels of intelligence had helped. He found it in one of the books on the 3rd tier. Polaris. The fixed star. The one that's always in the same place. Like the stones of Grawald. He closed his eyes. Darren tomorrow. Darren arrived on the 4th day. He wasn't alone. 2 others were with him. A man in the uniform of the Crown Guard and a scribe with a portable desk and an inkwell. Darren dismounted. The guard remained in the saddle. The scribe began setting up the desk right in the castle courtyard. Darren approached Renard. He was smiling. Subtly. Politely. The smile of a man who had come for an answer he already knew. He said he hoped for a reasonable decision. Renard nodded. He said he had made his decision. Darren raised an eyebrow, a gesture Renard had seen 1,000 times in his past life. Renard said no. Darren was silent for 3 seconds. Then his smile widened. He said he was disappointed, and that, in that case, he was forced to initiate an early foreclosure procedure. He nodded to the clerk. The clerk produced a document, a long scroll bearing seals. He began to read it aloud. Renard listened. The wording was standard. He knew it by heart. He had drafted such documents himself in his past life. The owner's inability to ensure repayment of the debt, recognition that the property was insufficient, the Crown's right to seizure, transfer to the management of the Crown agency. When the clerk finished, Darren handed Renard a quill. Sign and you'll keep your title. Refuse and you'll lose everything. Renard took the quill. He looked at it. Then he set it down on the table. He said that before signing anything, he would like to discuss a few documents. Darren narrowed his eyes slightly. Renard took out a leather pouch. He placed it on the clerk's desk. He untied it. He laid out the documents one by one. The first, a letter regarding reallocated military expenditures, 6,400 marks. Renard explained in a calm voice that this sum represented state military expenditures that had been transferred to a private owner without legal grounds. Darren looked at the letter. His expression didn't change, but the fingers of his left hand twitched slightly. Renard noticed. 14 years at court. The second document, a land code dating back a century. The tax rate for Grauwald was 3 marks per tithe. The current rate was 9 marks per tithe. A threefold increase without any stated reason and without approval from the Land Council. Illegal under King Morven's statute regarding the immutability of base rates without a royal decree. Darren stopped smiling. The third document, the Chronicle of the House of Ashters, opened to the page describing the death of Lord Bolton. Renard did not read it aloud. He simply laid the book open. Darren looked at the page. His face became expressionless, like a mask. The fourth document, a report on the condition of the bridge over Grey Creek. Renard took it out of his pocket. He had written it himself. The report stated that the bridge had been deliberately destroyed with a tool. There were marks where a crowbar had struck the joints in the masonry. The date of the destruction coincided with the year the garrison was disbanded. Darren stood motionless. The guard behind him shifted from foot to foot. The scribe froze with his quill in hand. Renard spoke, quietly, calmly, without anger, without triumph. He said that copies of all these documents were kept in a secure location outside the estate. It was a lie. There were no copies. But Darren had no way to verify it. Renard said that if the seizure procedure were initiated, the documents would be sent to 3 addresses: the Chancellor, the Land Council, and the King personally. They would contain a detailed account of how the Deputy Chancellor of the Treasury had systematically destroyed the ancestral estate through accounting manipulations. Darren remained silent. His face was ashen, not out of fear, out of calculation. He was weighing his options. Renard could see how his mind worked. The same type of thinking. The same school of thought. Darren was weighing the risks. The documents were genuine. The facts were verifiable. The connection between the rewritten debt, the disbanded garrison, and the increased taxes was obvious to anyone who knew how to read financial statements. And the Chancellor could. Darren spoke. His voice was steady, in control. He said that the young man was clearly overestimating the significance of these papers, that the reallocation of expenses was standard procedure, that tax rates were reviewed regularly, that the bridge could have been destroyed by anyone. Renard had been waiting for those words. He spoke a single sentence. He said that if the Viscount was so certain he was in the right, he had nothing to fear from investigation. Silence. The wind rustled the papers on the clerk's desk. The guard looked back and forth between Darren and Renard. The clerk didn't move. Darren looked at Renard. Renard looked at Darren. In a past life, that look would have killed him. Darren had no patience for those who stood in his way. A knife between the third and fourth ribs. But now a table piled with documents stood between them. And behind those documents lay a threat more terrifying than a knife. Public scrutiny. Darren broke. Not on the outside. On the inside. Renard saw the moment. His shoulders dropped slightly. His jaw relaxed slightly. His eyes lost focus for a split second. Then they regained it. Darren said he was ready to discuss the terms. Renard laid them out. First, full write-off of 6,400 marks in illegally reclassified military expenditures. Second, a return of the tax rate to its historical level of 3 marks per tithe. Third, a 2-year deferral of the remaining debt instead of 4 months. Fourth, a written waiver from the Crown Office of any claims to the estate's administration. Darren listened. Each point struck a nerve, but every point was backed by documentation. He could not refuse without risking an investigation. He could agree and lose his leverage, or refuse and lose his position. Darren chose his position. He nodded to the scribe. The scribe began to write. Renard stood and watched as the quill scratched across the paper. In a past life, he had stood on the other side of this table. He was the one who wrote, the one who signed others' sentences, the one who ravaged others' homes for others' purposes. Now he stood on this side, and he was defending his home. When the scribe finished, Darren affixed his seal, a golden one on a chain. Then he turned to Renard. His eyes were empty. He spoke a single sentence. He said that the young lord had many talents for a man who had grown up among ruins. Renard replied that ruins were a good teacher. Darren mounted his horse. The guard and the scribe followed him. The three figures rode off down the road toward the highway. Renard stood at the gate, holding the signed document in his hands. The ink wasn't dry yet. The debt had been reduced from 11,000 to 4,600. The repayment period had been extended from 4 months to 2 years. The tax rate had been cut by 2/3. He retained control. He had won. Not the war, the battle. Darren would return, in a different way, through other people, through other papers, but not today. Moraine was standing around the corner of the tower. He heard the entire conversation. The old man looked at Renard in a way Renard had never seen before. Not with respect, with something greater. With the realization that standing before him was a man he'd underestimated, and that this man had saved his village with documents he found in dusty books. Moraine approached. He said one thing. He said that when the first lord built this castle, people came to him because he gave them walls. This lord is giving them walls again. Renard looked at the old man, then at the castle, at the wall with 2 breaches and one filled with a black stone, at the smithy from which came the sound of a hammer, at the stable roof, at the well, at the road along which Darren had ridden away. He nodded. Then he walked toward the tower's cellar. 28 blocks of glass stone were waiting. 2 years, 4,600 marks, and the man who would return. 2 years. Renard had been building for 2 years. First cut. The winter following Darren's visit. The castle wall. Renard worked through the nights. Block by block, glass stones were fitted into the gaps. 28 blocks closed the 2 remaining gaps and reinforced the tower's foundation. The wall was fully restored. Defense +8. 4 base points multiplied by 1.5 plus a bonus for the material. Renard stood on the wall and looked down. The castle courtyard looked different. Clean. Neat. A new frame of the gate stood by the well. Smoke rose steadily from the smithy. The stable was covered by a roof. There was a horse in the stable. The first one ever. Bought with money from the blacksmith's shop. Second cut. Spring. Porfeld. Cord brought people. Not from Grauwald. From Wineholm. 3 men with their families who had heard that there was land in the south and a lord who didn't collect taxes for the first year. Renard didn't collect taxes. He gave them houses, 4 restored houses in Torfeld. He gave him fields, the southern slope with its black soil. Rye had been sown in the fall, and by spring the green shoots had broken through and meet rows. Cord stood at the edge of the field and watched. His face looked different, not sullen, not indifferent. Focused. The face of a man who sees the results of his work. The bridge he built with his own hands led to this field. This field feeds people. His work feeds people. Renard saw this and remembered it. Third cut. Summer. Grain silo. New. Built from scratch. A foundation of glass stone. Granite walls. A roof of dried logs. Brigg oversaw the construction. She didn't build it alone. She had helpers. 2 young men from the new families in Torfeld. She taught them. She grumbled. She made them redo things. They redid them. The granary. Restored. Stamina +4. Base 2. Multiplier for the glass foundation. Bonus. 4th harvest. Fall. The first harvest. Wagons came from the southern fields across the bridge. Rye. Golden. Heavy. The granary was filling up. Cord stood by the bridge and counted the wagons. 1, 2, 5, 9. His share, just as he'd agreed. Half the harvest. Renard didn't haggle. He kept his word. Cord saw that. Everyone saw it. The reaction. The market in Wineholm. Renard brought the grain in person. The first wagon from Grauwald in 10 years. The merchants watched. One of them, an old man with a red face and sharp eyes, approached. He asked where the grain came from. Renard said Grauwald. The merchant laughed. He said that Grauwald was a wasteland. There were no people there, no fields, nothing at all. Renard silently showed him the grain. The merchant took a handful. He rubbed it between his fingers. He sniffed it. He bit into it. His expression changed. He stopped laughing. He named a price, a good one. Renard sold his entire harvest for 800 marks, his share. Cord sold his separately, 800 marks, plus a year's income from the blacksmith's shop. Halmer forged every day. Orders kept coming in from the surrounding villages, from the highway, even from Wineholm. The two guildmasters who had barred Halmer from the guild gnashed their teeth but could do nothing about it. Grauwald was outside the city guild's jurisdiction. A year's income from the smithy, a third went to Renard, 420 marks. Total, 800 plus 420, 1,220 marks for the first year. Minus expenses, food for the workers, materials, seeds, a horse, and tools, 600 marks in expenses. Net profit, 620. Debt, 4,600. Minus 620, 3,980. The second year was different. Grauwald's population grew. 17 became 43. New families arrived. Word spread. A lord who doesn't levy taxes. A lord who gives away land. A lord with a working smithy and clean water. People came and stayed. Every new house meant more working hands. Every pair of working hands meant construction. Every structure meant greater strength. Renard built, non-stop. Barns in Stenhall, +3 to shut down. The Brickmore fence, +2 to defense. A well in Stenhall, +1 to stamina. A training yard next to the barracks, made of glass stone. The remaining blocks and new ones mined by cord from the vein beneath Torfeld, +6 to strength and +4 to speed. The infirmary by the castle, +3 to recovery, a stat he hadn't had before. He could feel his cuts healing faster. He could feel his fatigue fading after just 1 hour of sleep instead of 6. A watchtower on the hill, made of glass stone. +5 perception, a new stat. He began to see farther, hear more distinctly, sense movement at the edge of his vision. Renard stood at the top of the watchtower and calculated. Stamina 15, strength 20, defense 17, speed 10, intelligence 9, regeneration 3, perception 5, total 79 levels. General Corvain had 12 strength and 10 stamina. Renard had 20 strength and 15 stamina. He was stronger than the kingdom's best warrior in every stat, and he hadn't drunk a single potion. He was building. The second harvest was larger than the first. New fields, more people, better seeds. 1,400 marks per bushel. The blacksmith's shop had grown. Halmer took on an apprentice, then a second one. Income from the blacksmith's shop in the second year. A third went to Renard, 700 marks. The bridge began to bring in money. Renard didn't charge a toll. But merchants traveling across the bridge to the southern villages along the highway stopped in Grauwald. They bought water, food, blacksmith's shop goods. Total sales for the second year, 300 marks net. Total for 2 years, debt of 4,600. Paid off in the first year, 620. Paid off in the second year, 2,400. Balance, 1,580. Renard sat in the tower. The money lay on the table, 1,580 marks. The final payment. He put the coins into a bag, tied it shut. In the morning, he would take it to Wineholm, to the Crown Tax Office. He would pay. He would receive a receipt. And the Grauwald estate would be debt-free. For the first time in 10 years, he stood up. He walked over to the window. Below lay the castle courtyard, a well. A smithy with steady smoke rising from it. A stable with a horse. Beyond the wall, a road, intact, repaved. Beyond the road, hills. Beyond the hills, 3 villages, alive, with people, with smoke rising from their chimneys, with children running between the houses, with fields waiting for the third sowing. He remembered standing before these gates 2 years ago, a boy with a debt scroll in his pocket, with hands that knew how to do nothing, with the memory of a knife between his ribs. He built. Stone by stone, wall by wall, house after house. And every stone made him stronger. Not just his body, something else. He knew that Darren wouldn't return in person. It was too risky. But Darren's men would come. To check, to watch, to wait for a mistake. Renard had no intention of making a mistake. 79 levels. And he wasn't done building yet. The chapel was waiting to be restored. The market square wasn't built. The outer wall hadn't even been started. The mill, the dock, the roads. Every stone, every level, every day. He closed the window, lay down on the mattress. The same old mattress. He could have bought a bed. Could have bought a feather bed, could have moved to a nicer room. But the mattress served as a reminder of that first night, of the star on the crack in the ceiling, of the taste of blood on his palms, of the stones no one wanted. He closed his eyes. Tomorrow he would pay off his debt. The day after tomorrow, he'll start building the chapel. In a week, he'll lay the first stone of the outer wall. In a month, he'll lay the foundation for the market square. In a year, in 2, in 10. In his past life, he built a career on other people's secrets and got stabbed in the back. In this life, he's building a house from his own stones. And every stone remains. In the morning, he mounted his horse and rode to Wineholm. A bag of money hung from the saddle. Heavy. 1,580 marks. His last debt. He rode through the gate, past the stone pillars, past the sign. Grauwald, the ancestral estate of the Astor family. The letters were new. Talvin had carved them last week. Deep, clear, visible from afar. Renart rode past and didn't look back. He knew the gate was still standing. He knew the walls were still standing. He knew the stones were still standing. They weren't going anywhere. They were his.